heroes of lore and legend, whether student, teacher, parent, teller of tales, or scaler of hill forts.
The Great Tales is a podcast about myths and legends from both inside and outside the Christian tradition, and we come to you live twice a month to talk about these great stories that Christians have been reading and passing on for centuries, and sometimes much longer than that.
Last time, we were joined by the inestimable and, dare I say, incomparable Dr. Martin Shaw, who told us the story of the 3 golden hairs on the devil's head. Actually, we found out the devil's got more than 3, but quite a lot of hair.
That's right. That was so fun. Today, we are going to get a little nostalgic for our 2022 pilgrimage when, as a good wizard, I took the ridiculously tall hobbit on an adventure to the Baltic Sea, where for eons untold, the reddish jewel of the north, amber, has washed up on those ancient shores.
That's right, and we're going to be covering 3 of the stories that we learned while we were in Lithuania, and that is the Tale of Sovijus, the Iron Wolf, and the Swan Queen.
Yeah. So, well, before we do that, though, Axios, our own Richard Rowland has cast off his Germanic alliteration and been transmogrified into Deacon Seraphim, because, of course, what American Orthodoxy needs is another guy named Seraphim. I was there. I can confirm. I can confirm that it all went down just as those seedy Dallas tabloids said. So let us take a moment of silence to say farewell to the plaid and to the thematic T-shirts.
Yes. Very sorry to say that the age of the T-shirt has passed.
The age of the cassock has come.
The age of the cassock has come. Yes, I mean, I think that we should seriously, people should really think and wonder, is like, why are so many people attracted to Saint Seraphim of Sarov that they would want to name themselves and their children after him?
He's great.
That's
he is great.
He's wonderful.
He's great. Wonderful. He's great. Yeah, I mean, and runner-up probably Paisios. There's a lot of Paisii. I don't know how you Paisios is.
Yeah. Paisiu. Yeah, I mean, not sure. Yeah, no, it was amazing, and it was wonderful to have you here. I felt very touched that you were there, and very touched. We had my good friend Jonathan Pajot here, and a bunch of people from the Symbolic World community, and a lot of friends
Orthodox
and family
Avengers
from out of town. I mean, it was incredible. And there was also the day before that, we did something I'm hoping is going to be an annual or at least a semi-annual event. The Orthodox Arts Festival here at St. Constantine and Helen Antiochian Church in North Dallas, which was
cool.
Incredible.
That was cool.
And you didn't come to my talk, and you did not stick around for the panel, so it could have been cooler. But
I was poached, as it were.
Yeah, no, it's
by our good friend Father Photius at St. Sava Church.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's all good, but it was a beautiful time, and it was a great time actually. We did a lot of storytelling. I told some fairy tales, and actually in kind of the way that Dr. Shaw has been teaching some of us to do. Although, I'm not him; I have to be me, so it's in my voice, not his. But I told some fairy tales and some myths, and that was really a lot of fun. And then the next day we had the ordination, and then we had a party, and we had toasts. And it was just, it felt like a very medieval weekend, despite all the time I spent driving people around in a Suburban. But other than that, it felt very medieval. True. So,
yeah.
All right, so we want to let you guys know a couple of things are coming up. One is that starting in June and running through the summer months of 2025, so probably June, July, August-ish, this show is going to be airing live in the evening. So we'll basically be on the Thursday night that Lord of Spirits isn't. I think that's right.
Roughly, more or less. It's basically the first and third Thursdays of the month. Right. But it'll be in the evening.
Right.
For those months.
And this is just because of some scheduling things that can't be changed. But God willing, it's just a temporary situation. So we should be back to our midday schedule in the fall. So that being said, Father Andrew, I know this is going to be very hard for you. But would you please tell us about Lithuania?
Oh, I never thought you'd ask.
I know.
Father Andrew, are you Lithuanian? I had not heard.
We had not heard about this.
Yes. So, Lithuania is a country that a lot of people don't, at least in the United States, they don't know about. I mentioned it to people, and they're like, "Is that in Africa somewhere, or Asia, or?" So, if you don't know where Lithuania is, it is in northeastern Europe, right? So, if you're looking at a map of Europe, like most Americans can probably pick out the UK. So, okay, so you're looking at the UK, go up to Scotland, and then just start heading east, and you head east. And you get to where all those Vikings invaded England from, the Scandinavian countries. And then you keep going. And then there's a sea there that's connected to the Atlantic, and it's called the Baltic Sea. So on the western shores of the Baltic, you've got Sweden, and then Denmark is also there. But then the eastern shores of the Baltic, there are the three Baltic states, three Baltic countries. Estonia in the north. Well, also Finland is up there. Even farther north, Estonia in the northernmost of the three Baltics, Latvia, and then Lithuania. Okay, so Lithuania is roughly the same latitude as parts of Scotland and like Newfoundland and Canada. So it's pretty far north, relatively speaking. We're not talking Arctic Circle. It's not that cold. It does get up into like the 80s in the summer, 80s Fahrenheit. I don't even know what that would be in Celsius, which is what they actually use. And the earliest use of the name Lithuania is actually from a Latin document in the very early 11th century. So the name itself, at least in writing, has existed for at least about 1,000 years. Probably is older than that, because no one was claiming writing that they're inventing the name.
Just as like a small note, usually when somebody says something like the first attested, that is the first surviving piece of paper or, inscription or something, whenever somebody says that, you can always usually confidently backdate whatever it is by a good bit, at least 100 years. Because typically speaking, if you find something written down with no explanation, it's because no explanation was needed. Right. And
exactly.
and that's which means that it was already in use.
Well known, yes.
Yeah, a good example, of course, being like the word Theotokos, which certainly appears, very early in the 4th century in writing, but that does not at all mean that was the first time that it was ever used. It just means that's the earliest written examples that survive.
Yeah.
Well, I think the earliest written examples that survive might be from the 2nd century. But anyway, this is the wrong podcast.
That's right. Exactly. But so Baltic people are, number one, they are not Slavs. They're not Slavs. A lot of people say, "Oh, are they like Russians?" Or no, they're not. And if you know anything about the history of Eastern Europe, you know that that is a very very sore spot in many points in Eastern European history and even now to some extent. But they are a very distinct group. Linguistically, it is generally believed that the Baltic languages, which there's only 2 Baltic languages, Lithuanian and Latvian. There used to be a few more. But it's generally believed that the Baltic languages and the Slavic languages were once one as a Proto-Balto-Slavic, but some people say that that's not true. It's hard to tell because they've been neighbors for so long that they've traded a lot of words, and so it's hard to tell whether it's because of a common ancestor that a word exists in these languages, or because it got traded one way or another at an early point. In any event, they're neighbors. They've kind of always been neighbors as far as anyone knows. But the Baltic cultures are unique as related to the Slavs. They're quite different. Linguistically, they're very different. Lithuanian itself is probably the most archaic of all Indo-European languages. It is immensely complex grammatically. It retains a lot of very, very old forms that eventually just sort of evolved out of most Indo-European languages.
In that sense, it's sort of like if you went to India and people were speaking Sanskrit, it's a little bit like that.
Right. And there's actually a lot of really obvious cognates with Sanskrit.
Yeah.
Like an easy example, for instance, is in Sanskrit, you've got the word deva, which means a god or a divine spirit of some kind. And dievas is God in Lithuanian, in modern Lithuanian. And in
By the way, that word is in Greek too.
Yes, right. And so, and that's the word that's used not just for a god, but it is the word used for, because Lithuania is a Christian country these days, Dievas is God himself. our God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So, but one of the things that's really interesting for our conversation is that Lithuania was the last pagan nation in Europe. Probably the next to last might have been the Latvians, but they get conquered by Germanic crusaders who basically make them Christians by
I will say,
pointing swords at them.
This is a funny thing is that if you talk to the Estonians, they're the last ones. It's weird. I have many Estonian friends that I'm quite close to that I go to church with and so on and so forth. And they're very staunchly Orthodox Christians. I mean, the most Orthodox people you can imagine. But they're like weirdly also proud. It was like, oh yeah, Estonia, we held out the longest. It's funny. It's funny.
Right.
I'm not throwing any shade towards Estonia.
Yeah, exactly.
It's very funny.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating region of the world, and my ancestors come from there. So that's my introduction to that world. But we went there 3 years ago. And I don't know. I immediately just felt at home. So
the weird thing is I felt at home, and I'm not even like my ancestors, as far as I know, are not from there. Although I have actually found some Estonian ancestors doing the family tree stuff. Some Estonian Lutherans, and then also some Volga Germans whose baptismal records were in Old Slavonic. So
how about that?
Yeah, how about that?
Well, keep working on it. You and I are going to be cousins, I'm sure.
That's right. We'll just make it happen.
So in any event, but also a really important piece of this story is that writing is not part of pagan Baltic culture.
Right.
As it is for, frankly, most of Europe. Writing is not a part of the pagan culture for most of Europe, especially Northern Europe, the further north you go. Now, areas that were under the Roman Empire, yes, they've got writing. They were pagans who wrote, Latin, Greek, all these things. But writing for Northern Europe and Eastern Europe, it comes with Christianity. What that means is that we don't actually have any pagan Balts saying, this is what we do and believe and how we worship and what our religion is and what our stories are. So all of the stories that we have that are related to Lithuanian legends and mythology and so forth, they might have some connection with pre-Christian Lithuanian paganism. They might. There's good reason to believe that they do, but we have to kind of hedge that a little bit and say they might. In some ways, it's parallel to like the situation of the Norse, where you have these pagan stories, but they're all written down by Christians centuries after Christianization. So there are attempts at reconstructing these things. The reconstruction of the stories is probably somewhat more successful than the reconstructions of the religion, because it's easier to reconstruct a story from bits and pieces. But reconstructing ritual practices, unless you have them explicitly described, we do this, and then we do this, and then we do this, you're really kind of making stuff up.
Even then, the described versions may be, not as helpful as you would expect them to be.
As a new clergyman yourself, I'm sure.
Yeah, I had nothing in particular in mind. I had nothing in particular in mind. Yeah,
it says this in the book, but this is how you do it.
I served a liturgy this morning, and there were a couple of times I was like, Father was like, "No, come over here." So the book says this, and he's like, "I know." And the sad thing is, like, we make our own books at the cathedral. Like, we have our own translation, we make our own books, and even then, it's not quite the same.
Yeah, exactly. So all of that is to say, we have some stories. And the stories that we have, whether they have a pagan origin or a true pagan origin or not, they are now part of Lithuanian culture. So they are present in Lithuanian Christian culture now.
Yep.
They are told and discussed in school, in people's homes. This is part of the culture. And this, God willing, is going to be just the first of multiple episodes that we'll do. Because I don't know about you. See, I almost called you Richard there, Deacon Seraphim. But I fell in love with these stories. I just think they're so fun, and they have their own peculiar character that's different from the stories of different cultures, So we're doing 3 today, and God willing, we're going to do more in the future. And I should just say, why don't you give a plug, because you were the person who actually did most of this work. We have a project that we've done that's related to these stories in particular. So why don't you plug that?
Right. So we have a podcast called The Wolf and the Cross, an Orthodox Christian pilgrimage to Lithuania. And it's a really beautiful podcast. I think, sort of auditorily wise. Oh boy, that was not a pretty way to say that. I'm very tired, guys. Just in terms of the quality of the sound, the quality of the production as a podcast, sort of like a pure podcast. Nowadays, podcast actually usually means like YouTube show. It seems like, and I mean that's what we're here doing. But I mean, so this is like an audio only kind of a thing. But it's like very high quality. I think it's one of the prettiest things that Ancient Faith has done. And we still have 1 or 2 episodes left. Father, is that right?
There's 5 episodes currently out. Yeah. And then one of the episodes I think it's episode 4, is specifically dealing with legends and fairy tales of Lithuania, including also, some of these stories.
And also hagiography, yeah.
Yeah.
So this was one of the things that I specifically worked on for the podcast, was to actually rewrite some of these legends. In some cases, I took existing English translations and kind of merged them. And in other cases, I had to go to a German translation because it was the Germans mainly who went around collecting these sorts of things.
Yes.
And I mean, hate on the Germans all you want, and there certainly are plenty of reasons to do that. But they're very good at collecting.
Yes.
And so
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, so we should say then. That like this first story that we're going to tell, in fact, 2 of these stories, the Tale of Sovijus and then the Iron Wolf, both of these show up in episode 1 of that documentary. But so this first one, related to what you were just saying, this first one, the Tale of Sovijus, it's first, just by way of introduction, I'm going to have Deacon Seraphim read this for you, everybody, so you can actually get it, because probably most of you have never read this story or even heard of it. It's first written down, as far as anyone knows, in Slavonic in the 13th century. So this is probably a Ruthenian, someone from one of those Slavic lands to the south of Lithuania, that's like Belarus, Ukraine, those areas, who heard this story and then wrote down this version of it. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't come to us in Lithuanian, because actually at that point in the 13th century, as I recall, I don't think there even is any written Lithuanian yet. Like Lithuanian is not a written language, I believe, at that point. But this is the earliest known Lithuanian myth. It's the earliest attested, we'll say. So I'm going to just tell everybody, it's a little weird.
It's very it's got a lot of helpful explanation that makes it very obvious what's going on in the story.
Yes.
That was sarcasm, children.
Yes.
All right, so here's the story. Here's the story.
Tell us the story.
So Sovijus is a man named Sovijus. He went out hunting one day and caught a wild boar, and he began butchering it and removed, of course, its 9 spleens. I will say I've butchered many wild boar, and all of them only had the 1 spleen, but this one has 9. Instead of cooking them, however, his sons eat them raw. And eating them raw really enrages Sovijus. Sovijus decides to descend into the underworld. He's had enough of this. He travels through the 8 gates of hell. He could not make it through the 9th gate, however, and so one of his sons decided to help him. Now the other brothers become angry with the helpful son, who then offers to help his father Sovijus receive a proper burial. So he went down to the underworld and had dinner with his father. That night, the son made his father a bed underground, but Sovijus slept very badly, saying he was eaten all night by worms. On the 2nd night, the son made him a bed in the trunk of a tree, but Sovijus again slept badly, saying that he was being stung by bees and mosquitoes all night. On the 3rd night, the bed was made out of fire. The next morning, Sovijus awoke fully refreshed and said that he had slept very soundly.
Okay, so
The end.
yeah, the end. The end. Yeah, so there's a lot of bizarre stuff in here. You know, there's this boar. It's got 9 spleens. He's so mad he decides to die. It's basically what it comes down to.
Yes.
Although, is that really what's going on here? We could talk about that. But then he has trouble getting, finishing the job,
Right.
and requires burial. And so one of his sons goes down and eats with him. And then there's these 3 different kind of body disposition methods
that
are tried, right?
Yeah.
You've got straight out burial, but Sovijus says he was being eaten by worms, and so that bugged him.
Yeah.
As it would. And then here's the one that's a little, they're all kind of odd. He puts him in the trunk of a tree. There's images of this. There's actually an early 20th century painting of this, and I think this is in our slides, where and all of the analysis I've seen of this says that this is not like being put inside the tree.
Yeah,
this is him being sort of
branches.
Yeah, hung in the branches.
Yeah, I mean they still do this in some parts of India, I think.
Yeah, there's like the Zoroastrians have something called sky burial.
Right. But there is, I think, a true burial thing is practiced in some parts of India still.
Yeah, yeah. So in both those cases, right? So sky burials in the Zoroastrians is done with a tower, I think.
Yeah, that's right. Tower, the top of a mountain or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the idea is you just put the body up there, and then it's just exposed to the elements and probably eaten by carrion birds.
Yeah. Right, carrion birds kind of carry off everything, and then at the end of the process, all you have left is bones.
Right.
Yeah. There are also in Tibet, I think that they still practice a kind of mummification, which is very similar to that, where they sort of put you up where there's no air and the body completely dries out,
Yeah.
So these are all really ancient Indo-European ways of disposing of bodies.
Right.
And the thing to sort of note with the story is that Sovijus decides to descend into the underworld. He's very upset. So he's going down into hell. Is he killing himself? Is he? It's not quite that, right? But it's more like he's going down into hell for something. He's going down into the underworld for something. There's some kind of wisdom or some kind of knowledge that he's supposed to get. But the problem with going to the underworld in old stories is that you have to have the help of your family, your loved ones who are still living, still in the land of the living.
Which explains like it's such like on first blush it seems like such a weird story. Like why would
it actually makes so much sense to me now? Like just read it again. I was like, oh well, this is obviously
right. When you sit on it for a while, you kind of get more. But think about like why would this be an important story? It's about so the place it lands, of course, is with cremation. Right. Burning the body.
Right.
And that's the one that Sovijus says, I slept soundly, right? So
which ultimately that is where most Indo-European cultures land.
Yeah. Eventually they get to that point.
And then Christianity comes along and we make you stop burning people.
Right. And it's interesting, like you read, I mean, you said most Indo-European cultures, for instance, I think in the Odyssey, right?
In the Odyssey, in the Iliad.
Burial is really an important thing.
By the speaking of Babel, this is the age of the T-shirt has passed, but the age of the bespoke mug has come.
There you go.
So this is my cool. I don't have a cool Amber Sea mug, but this is my cool Beowulf mug from Tamburn Bindery. You guys should totally check them out on Etsy. They're incredible. They do mostly beautifully hand bound, like leather illuminated. And they have a gospel book. They have a Beowulf.
This is not a paid promotion.
Advertisement at all.
We're not being sarcastic.
But my wife got this for herself, and I stole it for the episode today. But it's got Beowulf on it, and you can see it's the 3 monsters. So he's like ripping the arm off of Grendel here, and then the dragon's up here, and he's cutting the head off of Grendel's mother right here. And anyway, it's very rad. By the way, guys, if you ever make this into a T-shirt, I would totally buy like 10 of them.
Yes.
So. But anyway, but I mean, this is topical because this is the same. I mean, like old Indo-European culture is more similar than it's different. And so like the world that Beowulf happens in, like the Germanic Iron Age, and the kind of like the old Indo-European culture that you have even in somewhere like Persia, modern day Iran, is those worlds are all kind of very tied together, and you can see this in the things that remain of, ritualistically. For instance, one of the things that we have the best evidence of pretty much always is how bodies are disposed of, which is that they're burned before Christianity, and the reason that you burn the body is so that the soul can escape. So this is part of the problem, is that Sovijus, he can't go through the ninth door, he can't go all the way to the end of the underworld, because his soul is still attached to his body.
Attached to his body. Yeah. And I mean, it's worth noting that even in paganism, Indo-European paganism, there's this kind of progression. Like the earliest stuff is all about burial, right? Which you can kind of see that progression in this myth. There's this connection with the earth, and then with the sky, in this sort of halfway place of exposing the body in the air, and then by burning it, you're sort of kind of speeding up the earth to the sky sort of thing.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
It goes up with the smoke. And I mean, one of the things, so I read a few papers about this myth, and it's interesting. I mean, this has been studied by scholars, and there's a lot of disagreement about what it means and so forth. And that's fine. It's fine. You can interpret this in various ways. And that's cool, because frankly, part of it is that this is nobody's religion anymore. Not really. So this is now part of the cultural inheritance of Lithuania. And one of the things that's said is, like, why is it that Sovijus goes to the underworld? It's not just he's sort of so mad I'm going to die.
Right.
There is actually a sense of descending into the underworld, and some suggest that there's a couple different versions of this. One is that he becomes a psychopomp, right? That having been escorted successfully into the underworld, that he becomes the one who does that now. He escorts souls into the underworld. And then there's another version, and this maybe is just a progression of that suggests that he basically becomes, on some level, the lord of the underworld. Now, he's not the usual figure that is described as kind of the god of death or the underworld in Lithuanian mythology, but in any event, he's got this sort of association as kind of a death lord, so that he's going down there to kind of establish a kingdom or something like this. And so then cremation, like you said, it's about trying to find some kind of wisdom. And so a number of pagan cultures regarded cremation as a kind of advanced, like it's an advance. It's better than what we used to do. It's truer to our philosophy of life and death and our cosmology and all that kind of stuff. All right. Well, I mean, I know you have experience with boars. So actually, did you guys know out there? I'm talking to you, YouTube chat. Did you know that, if you get in good with Deacon Seraphim, you too can go stab a real boar, like in person?
Unfortunately, my hunting days are kind of past me now.
What? Oh man!
Sort of I mean, it's you're not supposed to hunt for sport.
Oh, that's true. I guess you can point people towards that, baby.
That's right. Yeah. I can hook you up.
And we should definitely do at some point an episode on the wild hunt.
Yeah, well,
which is a big like fairy mythology kind of image. This is not that though, is it? It's not a wild hunt exactly.
No, I mean this is. I mean, the 9 spleens here, that's the sort of...
What's that?
So in Northern European culture, boars are very frequently magical creatures. They are... let me put it another way. Like, every animal is magical in the sense that it means something, it stands for something, right? So you got to think about, like, what does the boar mean? What does the boar stand for? Right, and so in old Indo-European culture, the boar. So in like Anglo-Saxon poems, you have the boar helm. Well, what is a boar helm?
Yes.
Well, it's probably. I mean, we have examples. It's a helm with a boar on the crest, right? And there's also a very famous boar, more than one, in Welsh mythology, for instance, in the Mabinogion and all the sort of related stories. And typically speaking, the boar is one of the sort of analogs for like the king of the forest,
Yeah.
Right. So he's the biggest, toughest, meanest thing in the forest. Basically would compete with a bear, and the wolf, right, in this category. Except that the wolf is never the king of the forest. The wolf is always a thief. He's always because the wolf is a predator, right? But he's not just a predator; he's a scavenger. And then the bear is never he's never like kingly in the way that boar is, because he's solitary. Yeah. Bears are solitary. They mostly just want to be left alone.
I want to make a proposal.
Yes.
I want to make a proposal here.
Okay.
Up to this point in the podcast, we've been going since November now, so about 6 months. Yeah. 7 months. We're in month 7.
Pretty good. Most podcasts don't make it past the 3rd episode. So.
That is true. Actually, apparently the average podcast length is 7 episodes.
Well, you're definitely skewing the average, I would say, probably.
A touch. So we've been going for more than half a year now. And to this point, we have not yet designated an official mascot. I want to suggest that the mascot of the Great Tale podcast should be the magical pig. Just putting that out there. The magical pig. Magical pig.
Like an oracular pig, or just a magical pig?
An oracular pig. That's even better. I mean, like this pig is in some sense an oracular pig.
It actually is an oracular pig.
Yeah, right. So like this is one of the analyses that I've seen about this. Because I was like, okay, I got to understand this.
And there's an oracular pig in Celtic mythology.
Yeah. I got to understand this.
Also famously shows up in the Prydain Chronicles.
Yeah, so YouTube chat, sound off. What do you guys think? Should the magical pig be the official mascot of the Great Tales podcast? Just putting that out there.
My only objection to this is that pigs do not really have much of a tail.
Well, we provide that. We're the Great
Tales podcast. I don't know. I'll think about it. I'll take it under advisement. Certainly, like magical pig is my favorite thing to eat after Pascha.
That's right. Actually, I learned. This will be a fun kind of philological moment here. Someone asked me the question the other day. They said, this was a priest, actually. I won't say who it is because I don't want to embarrass him. He said, when did Western Christians stop calling the Feast of the Resurrection of the Lord Pascha and start calling it Easter? And I was like, okay, where do I begin here, Father? So I ran through like what the various languages, the Western languages actually do call the feast, and whatever. But as I was looking up the various names that exist for the feast in various languages, the truth is that most languages still use some version of Pascha.
Yeah, most languages. Passover, yeah.
Which comes from the Hebrew Pesach, Passover.
Yeah.
This will become relevant in just a second to what we were talking about. I promise you. It's just a slight digression, but we'll circle back. And the term Easter, of course, comes in the Germanic languages because of the month during which it's just from the name of the month that the feast fell in. And then there's several languages. Lithuanian is one of them. Latvian is another one. Polish is another one. And I think a couple of the other Slavic languages that call it some version of the word that in their language means great, like the great day, the great feast, or whatever, something like this, right? So, but here's the one that I loved so much, Hungarian. The name apparently means something to the effect of, take the meat. I mean, how about that?
I love Hungarians so much. Such a great culture.
So if there's any Magyars out there, and you got some stories to tell, please contact us. We want to talk about what you have to say.
Yes. I mean, that part of the world, super interesting, especially in like the 16th century, you had Orthodoxy, Roman Catholicism, Calvinism, and the Turks, like all in this melting pot of like border wars and river wars and all kinds of interesting things. But yeah, seriously, if anybody out there knows any good Magyar stories, we would love them.
By the way, so our your friend Nathaniel Masters, isn't he local to you?
He is. Served. He was in the altar with us.
Yes. Sunday. I recall. Yes, I met him. So this is what Nathaniel says this about the whole pigs and tails thing. He says this is the life of the pig, to search for a tail.
To search for a tail. I'll think about it. Yeah, no, it's cool. I mean, like,
Dogs chasing their tails. That's another thing.
Yeah.
We don't want that. You don't want a dog as a mascot because the dog is also a guided. A dog is a psychopath.
The dog is. If you meet a black dog in Ireland, just like that's it. Say your prayers.
You're dead.
Like, you're all done. You're done.
You're dead. He's going to take you into the underworld.
By the way, just while we're on this digression about names for Pascha, I grew up in a kind of sort of like evangelical culture where people didn't like to call it Easter. Like, it wasn't strictly against the rules, but there was that whole Easter thing that people were worried about. And so I still have people in my family who insist on calling it Resurrection Sunday, which I, as an Orthodox Christian, have no problem with.
Yes.
That's
there are languages. There are languages where that's the word as well.
Literally any Sunday, by the way. Like that's like every Sunday can be Resurrection.
Especially for
Sunday.
Russians, every Sunday is Resurrection Day.
But it was funny because I was talking to somebody in my family, and I forgot to like translate, and I accidentally said Pascha, and they were like, well, I don't know that, what your funny words are or whatever. I was like, well, it means Passover. It's just, it's like the word in the Bible. But, anyway, just it's just one of those funny things. Like, but it is funny how people kind of have, like, even if you're in a tradition that doesn't actually have any set way of knowing when the feast falls, there's still the sense that, like you should call it something proper. It's just very interesting to me, but.
Yeah. So, well, let's talk about spleens.
So talk about spleens. So all this to say, I've killed some boars. I've cut them up. I've carved them up. Each of them only had the one spleen, as far as I can remember, although I wasn't really looking for the spleen so much as I was the bacon. So
count the spleen, son. Count the spleen.
What's going on with the spleens?
Yeah. So when I first read this, I thought this is such a weird detail. But the thing you have to remember about myths is that the details really matter, especially when they're exaggerated like this. 9 spleens? Mm-hmm. Okay, so what is up with the spleen? Okay, the spleen is the source of what used to be called choler, right? Is that from bile? Yeah. And
bile's a different humor.
Yeah. Okay. Excuse me. Okay. Yeah. So, and this is associated with, so if someone has a choleric disposition, they're sort of like a bull in the china shop, kind of, they're pushing their way through, and so on and so forth. This is associated with divine fury, actually. The spleen is. And indeed, like possession by the divine. And so, but it gets actually weirder and deeper than this. So you've got, in the Roman world, you have this figure called a haruspex, and which I know that the plural is like something like haruspices,
haruspices, yeah. Or
haruspices, yeah.
Spices.
Yeah, if you want to get, and if you're going to do this, you're getting haruspicy, right? Isn't that correct?
That's
roughly?
Right.
That's absolutely true, I'm sure. So what does a haruspex do? A haruspex, his job is to take sacrificial animals and look at their entrails and use them to tell the future.
Right.
It's called divination.
It's really just the ancient version of data analysis is what it is.
It really is.
A data analysis is divination in the sense that what you are doing is looking at the remnants of things or the leftovers of things or the sort of like the abstract remains of things and then trying to use them to predict what will happen next, which is what I do for a living. So it's a good feeling.
It's true.
Makes me feel good every day.
And so, I mean, if you read these analyses, now I haven't seen this in what is attested about Lithuanian paganism is so fragmentary and so mixed in with other stuff. There's not a lot we can say about the religion itself. We're talking about the story. But if we're going to analogize it to other European religion, pagan European religion, we know that in many cases that what was going on with the spleen in particular, when you cut up a sacrificial animal and look at the offal, it's a very awful experience. When you do that, whatever was going on with the spleen is often considered to be sort of the most important bit of the information, the data analysis there, right? And so the haruspex would look at its color, its consistency, stuff like this. And so in many cases, it was regarded as being like the core of divine revelation in a sacrificial animal. I know that sounds weird, but that really is it, everybody. It really is it. And so, and so that's why one of the things that Deacon Seraphim said, everybody, that Sovijus is in search of wisdom.
Right.
If this is the case, if this is the reason for the spleens, then yes, it makes the sense that he's on a journey of wisdom. And it also makes sense, like, why is it that eating them raw is bad?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Why is eating, tell that. Why is eating them raw bad?
Oh boy. This is one of those things like I have a strong intuition about, but it's hard to explain out loud. So,
I mean, fire, of course, figures big in this story.
Yeah.
And normally you would cook them. I mean, I think, for instance, about, in Volsunga Saga, right, where they cook the heart of Fafnir the dragon, and Sigurd puts his thumb on it and tastes it, and he gains divination power, like he gains the ability to understand birds.
Right, which by the way is another important kind of divination. It's not just like overhearing what birds talk about. Yeah. But like an important kind of divination in ancient Indo-European culture is divining things from the flights of birds. Lots of good examples of this in the Iliad and so forth.
Oh, big time.
So the act of cooking is basically, it is how you take something and you are able to mediate it or make it, palatable, right?
Yes.
It's how you take something that's other than you, something that belongs to a different world, the animal world or the divine world or something like this. But also there's the fact that the act of cooking is also part of, it's almost always associated in ancient Indo-European paganism with a sacrifice. So there's no idea of like a secular meal. By the way, if you understand this, a lot of the New Testament makes more sense when you think about like the meat offered to idols and things like this. Like, it was very hard if you were a Christian in Corinth to find food that wasn't sacrificed to idols, because that's a normal part of preparing the meal. And again, if you want evidence for this, there's a great it's one of those annoying recipe books where like the recipe is really short and then everything, but then you just get like 3 or 4 pages of here's how I found this recipe, or here's a time that I cooked this recipe.
Like every recipe blog out there.
Anyway, really annoying travel log / cookbook called The Odyssey. And in this story, there's some famous Homeric scholar who described the Odyssey as Homer's wonderful little book about cooking, because literally almost every scene in the Odyssey, Odysseus gets somewhere and then he's going to tell a story about what happened to him while he was traveling. But before we do that, we have many lines, maybe hundreds of lines about. Then obviously, like, we have to go through the ritual of hospitality. And the ritual of hospitality involves we have to kill the animal, we have to prepare the sacrifice, we have to pour out something, whether it's some wine or some of the blood from the animal, or offer up the entrails of the animal. We have to offer something from the animal to the gods, and then we're going to sit down and we're going to have our meal. And that is the normal way. Yep. That's the normal way that you eat. And so for Sovijus' sons, like, he gives them the spleen, and then it's sort of like saying, this is something that has the potential to connect you to divinity and connect you to wisdom, and then they refuse to cook it, and they just eat it raw, and it's literally presumption, right? Eating too soon, right? Which is the first sin. Right, presumption, right, and so they eat things hastily, they eat them too soon. And there's no, and so the idea is it's sort of like getting unmediated wisdom or the sort of the divine fury or the divine power, but you're getting it without having reference to something higher, right? Through that act of cooking and through that act of sacrifice.
They're sort of jumping the gun,
something like that. Yeah,
and because it's not being cooked, that means that the gods aren't going to smell it, and it's not being shared with the gods.
Right. And so then Sovijus becomes enraged and has to make this descent into the underworld. And it's when you make a descent into the underworld, it is to actually it's to set the world back the way it's supposed to be. So think of it as a fall story. Like, it's really not that hard to understand. Like, it's a fall story. You can think about Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. They eat the thing that's going to give them divine knowledge, but they eat it presumptuously. That is too soon. All the fathers say that Adam and Eve would have been eventually given the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil if they had waited. Right? That it was given. It was a test, but it was never God's intent to withhold it permanently. Yeah. And so they eat presumptuously. They eat which is just a Latin word that means to eat too soon. That's what presumption is. So they eat too soon, and so they take the thing that's supposed to give them divine wisdom, but they take it without any reference to God, right? And it becomes a reference to, as Father Alexander Schmemann would say, because I'm a deacon in the OCA, I have to bring him up once an episode. But as Father Alexander Schmemann would say, the food becomes about food, the world just becomes about the world, as opposed to being this thing that then is the ladder that we can climb, the offering that can be offered up to God in thanksgiving. And it's the same kind of a thing here. And so now the world is out of kilter. And the only way to set the world to right is to make this descent into the underworld. So Sovijus makes this descent into the underworld, but now he can't get all the way down. And you notice there's 9 spleens, but there's 8 gates.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's interesting, even in like Sumerian.
Or rather, sorry, there's 9 spleens, 9 gates, right? So he makes it through the first, and the end. Yeah, and the idea is that each one of those, it's very obvious. Like, each one of the spleens sort of corresponds to one of the gates of the underworld, right? This idea of like, going into wisdom or going into death, and he can't make it through the 9th gate, so one of his sons decides to help him, and the way he does this is by going down to the underworld
and
having dinner with his father.
Yeah, exactly. So there's this sharing going on.
The refrigerarum, right? The having a meal with your dead ancestors, which is a very human thing to do, and actually something that Christianity was able to kind of elevate, right? And so, you think about there's a sacrifice that you would offer to the gods, and that's not the same thing as the meal that you share with your dead ancestor, with your dead relative. They're similar, but they're not the same thing. The sacrifice is directed upward. But I mean, so in Orthodoxy, we have in the Slavic tradition, which is and specifically Ruthenia, which is the part of the world the story is from. We do a thing on Bright Tuesday, or not Bright Tuesday, the Tuesday following Bright Tuesday, where we go out and you would have like a picnic at your loved one's grave. Radonitsa, that's right. Yeah. You have a picnic at your loved one's grave, and you would sing Christ is risen, right? And it's not that we feel like, oh, they're going to have this food in the afterlife or something like that. No, that's not what we're doing. No. But the point again is this idea that the severing of the relationship that has happened in death is something that we hope is temporary. And I mean hope in the sense of a Christian virtue of hope because of the resurrection. Yeah.
It's also fast. I was going to say, it's fascinating to me how, like, there's 9 gates to get into the underworld. I mean, I recall even in Sumerian myth, I mean, this is a long, long ways away. When Inanna goes into the underworld, she has to pass through 9 gateways. Yeah. And I think, isn't it the case, like, isn't it in Norse myth that there's 9 hells or something like that?
9 hells. Dante's got 9 levels to hell.
It's interesting,
This seems to be a well-attested datum.
Yeah, well, it's 3 threes. Yeah. This is a kind of a divine number in multiple ways,
Well, I think that 9 is the right number for any kind of hierarchy, is the way to think about it. There are 9 ranks of saints, 9 ranks of the angels,
right? Yep.
9 heavens, 9, et cetera, et cetera. Like
Ferris Bueller was absent from school 9 times.
I did not know that.
9 times.
Amazing. Yeah. Well,
I don't remember Ferris being absent from school 9 times. I've got it right in front of me, Mrs. Bueller.
Yeah. So, I've still never seen that movie.
What? Okay, I'm gonna have to take you to Chicago. I'm gonna have to take you to Chicago, and we're gonna reenact scenes from it.
Okay.
So
the only scene that I think I've ever seen is like the big parade at the end.
Yeah. Where they sing the Beatles.
They sing the Beatles. Yeah.
There's a whole scenario. In fact, there's a whole scenario in the Art Institute of Chicago. And actually, I recently went to the Art Institute of Chicago. When you enter into the lobby, there is a big sign off to the left that says, "Take the Ferris Bueller tour."
Okay.
And you can scan in a QR code and take the Ferris Bueller tour of the Art Institute of Chicago. I mean, this movie is, I think it's about 40 years old now, almost 40 years old. It's
incredible.
It's classic art.
I feel like it would be actually better for me to do the tour before seeing the movie. And then I could approach it as like I'm an archaeologist,
exactly,
from long after the film was made, and I'm trying to like reconstruct Gen X religion. And
there you go, exactly
using artifacts from the Ferris Bueller.
Exactly true.
Stand
next to the statue of Balzac, like this.
Yes.
And then stand and stare at the Seurat painting forever.
Why was this French poet so important to these Gen Xers?
I know.
We may never know.
We may never know.
Yeah.
Yes. There's a lot of speculation. Okay, so you mentioned fire. I mean, you kind of hinted towards this. And I think this is a good place to wrap up this tale because it ends in cremation. It ends in fire. I think it was, I can't remember which interpreter of this that I was reading that said this, but this is kind of a general thing that's said about mythology, is that fire is the thing that takes something from nature and makes it into culture, right? So cooking, human culture is what? Nature cooked, as it were. Yep. Nature kind of processed.
Yeah, that's right.
You take what's raw and you make it into something that's edible, and it's not just for consumption, it's what creates the culture, And so it's no surprise then that fire imagery is a big deal in a lot of mythology. I mean, think about like in Greek mythology, Prometheus brings fire from the gods to humanity, and that really makes humanity.
It's more like he steals it back because the gods, Prometheus taught humanity how to basically trick Zeus with the sacrifice. And so they wrap up all the, so in Greek paganism, we will be talking about this more when we do the Odyssey, but in Greek paganism, they would basically take all the best cuts and that goes to you, and then they would take all the awful and that goes to the gods. And they have a myth for this where Prometheus basically helps them trick the gods by just taking all the awful and wrapping it up in a really nice looking package, and then all the really good stuff in a terrible looking package. And then they go to the gods and say, Zeus, you pick which portion you want. And Zeus sees this package looks really good, and so he picks that one, and that's why that's the portion the gods get. And the gods were mad about this, and they took fire away, and and then Prometheus goes and steals it back, and then he gets.
It's notable that in the Bible, when God commands sacrifices, there's still animal sacrifices, he very explicitly says the best parts go to God.
Very specifically.
And that's in a response to paganism.
Absolutely, yeah. It's one of the remarkable things about the God of the Scriptures and like our God, the one true God, is that you can't pull the wool over his eyes. You could say demons are not that picky as long as they get you to worship them and they get you to not worship God and they get you to go to hell. Demons don't really care. But God really does want actually the best from us, and it's a tremendous and I will say terrifying thing that that I think about as I've started serving as I started serving in the altar and then moving towards ordination and everything, that God wants both the best thing we can do, but also He wants our hearts to be in it.
Yeah.
And there's a weird thing in American religion where we assume if somebody is putting a lot of work into making something beautiful, that it must just be like for show, but what you see in the Scriptures is that God says, well, I don't want your sacrifice if your heart's not in it, but also I do want your sacrifices. The point is the things that we do have to be in line with what He's asked for, but also our heart has to be in the right place.
Yeah. It's notable that like in Baltic mythology, as with almost every mythology, there are multiple gods that are associated with fire. Like the big one for the Balts is Perkunas, right? So
Yeah, right.
he's sort of like their Thor or Zeus.
Thor. Yeah.
He's thunder god. Yeah, he's more Thor than Zeus.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Thor and Zeus are kind of the same guy, though. But anyway.
Well, that's what Snorri would say.
Yeah, yeah. Different podcast.
Yeah.
I mean, they're both thunder gods.
But yeah, so he's a thunder god. So Perkunas is a thunder god. So he brings the rain. He's also kind of a warrior god. There are other ones, though. There's a god called Anduyas, who might be also Dievas, who is sort of the most high god.
Right. Zeus.
And then there's Televelis, who is a blacksmith, right, associated with fire. So, I mean, what does a blacksmith do with fire? He makes weapons.
Yeah.
But again, it's this idea of culture, of transformation, and so forth. And I think, when you read, for instance, or hear the hymns of the three martyrs of Vilnius, who were worshippers of Perkunas, who converted to Orthodox Christianity and were martyred because of their love for Jesus Christ. If you read the hymns, one of the things that's said in the hymns is that they refuse to worship fire.
Right.
They refuse to worship fire, meaning they refuse to worship Perkunas. But it's not just that they don't want to offer sacrifices to this god. It's really, I mean, it's this Promethean deal again.
Seems to be a parallel also between them and then like the three magi.
Oh, absolutely. Because there's worship of fire is connected with Zoroastrianism and all this sort of stuff. Yeah. I actually once went into, I was touring around Toronto and I drove by a Zoroastrian temple.
Was Freddie Mercury there?
And Freddie Mercury was not there, much to my disappointment.
Huge bummer.
Possibly the world's most famous Zoroastrian.
Easily the most famous.
Easily. And, but anyway, so I and my companion, we decided to stop, like, well, let's go have a look, and there was this young woman there and she very kindly took us on a tour of the whole place. It was mostly like a community center, but they actually had a space, which was their worship space. And we asked, I said, hey, can we go in there? They're like, you can't go in there because you're not, a Zoroastrian. I said, okay, I respect that.
Honestly, game recognized game.
Yeah, exactly. I said, is it okay if keeping my feet on the outside here, I can lean my head through the doorway? And she said, yes, you can do that. And so I did. So I poked my head in and I looked, and it was kind of a long rectangular space. And at the far end of it was a sort of raised platform, like upstage almost. And in the middle of it was what looked like, to me, from our experience, an infant baptismal font. Mm. That's what it looked like. It was, basically a big kettle, right?
Yeah, right.
But it was shaped like a baptismal font. And clearly in the center of it was a pile of ashes. Huh. A pile of ashes that rose up from the top of it. Huh. And so this is the sacred fire, and it's understood that each one of them ultimately has ash from Zoroaster himself, who lights this original fire. Is this almost kind of like an apostolic succession of sorts of fires?
Yeah.
But yeah, so in any event, the fire is really at the center of what it is that they're doing. And so this idea of the worship of fire, but it's not just, we worship fire because it's big and powerful. But think about what that means to worship fire. It also means to worship human ingenuity, human control, human power, because fire is what takes things from nature into being culture.
Right. And fire is also like the most destructive thing, but it's the thing that you can't have civilization without.
That's right. And so it's, it is a gift from God. Yeah. But when you control it and want to own it, I mean, the Greeks are right. What you get is Pandora's box.
Right.
In response, or really a jar.
I know that we said we were going to move on, but I'll just make a final comment here about the fire thing, and that is that the word for altar in Latin is focus. That's what a focus is. It's a hearth. It's really altar or hearth. But in early Indo-European paganism, certainly in like early Italian, like Etruscan, early Roman paganism, the hearth is the main altar of the. You could say like the hearth, the home hearth is also the home altar, right? And so like if you read a great poem called the Aeneid by an amazing poet named Virgil, there's this whole thing about how Aeneas has to take his household gods, right, and then set up a new hearth, that is, set up a new altar, set up a new focus for civilization Alba Longa, right? All these things in Latium. So this is and then eventually, when the city of Rome is founded, they take the hearth, this hearth fire thing, and that becomes the flame of Vesta, the goddess of the hearth, right? And you have the Vestal virgins. Their whole job, their whole reason for existence is basically just to perpetually tend this flame, right? And then the early Roman the Roman kingship rituals when they had kings was that the king, when he was being crowned, would enter the city and he would be ritually married to the hearth fire. He would be ritually married to the hearth, ritually married to Vesta, ritually married to the Vestal virgins. And that's the sort of like the basis. But that's basically some version of that is the crowning. That's the coronation liturgy for basically all ancient civilizations, which leads to some interesting things that happen with Holy Week. Holy Week is in some ways a response to this. Because Christ enters the city, and he enters as what? He enters as king. Blessed is he that comes in the name of the Lord. He's the king, he's the son of David, etc. He ascends to the high place of the city, which is the Temple Mount, but then he gets up there, and they are not ready for him. And so he throws over all the tables, purges the temple, but then he goes back out into the wilderness. He goes back outside of the city where he is slain, but also where he enters his bridal chamber, that is the tomb, and instead of being wedded to the city of Jerusalem, that is, the temporal Jerusalem, he's wedded to Zion, he's wedded to the church. And so, anyway, all these different things, like, I mean, the thing is that this is a short 3-paragraph story with a lot of unhelpful allusions, but as soon as you read it a couple of times, if you know anything about old Indo-European culture, I mean, you can really think and talk about it just for basically ever.
I know. We talked about it a little bit longer than I imagined we would, actually.
Yeah. This does not bode well for getting to the Swan Queen. So let's move on to what is probably the most famous Lithuanian folk tale, fairy tale.
Yes.
And has to do with the founding of the city of Vilnius. And I will say, by the way, that Vilnius is the coolest city that I've ever been to. Now, I haven't been to like as many cities as you have. But I love like the old medieval city of Vilnius, like Vilnius proper. I mean, it's you can walk the whole thing in an hour. It's just beautiful. Churches everywhere. It really made me like understand the way that you could say that a city is like that the city could be the center of civilization. That actually seemed possible in a medieval city context. When you're in sprawling suburbia and there's like 9 million people and there's no center to anything.
No center.
Harder to imagine. So anyway, why don't you tell us the story of the Iron Wolf?
Yeah, this is a story about the very center of this people. The dawn of the 14th century was a time of great change and upheaval. Far to the east, a man whom Europeans call Tamerlane began a bloody rise to power as he sought to restore the glory of the Mongol Empire. In Western Europe, the French and English thrones became locked in a long and bloody series of struggles known simply as the 100 Years' War, and on the northeastern edge of Europe, in a land of beautiful pine forests on the shores of the Baltic Sea, Grand Duke Gediminas stepped out of legend and into history. And this story begins with a hunt, not for a boar or a stag, but for the wisent, the powerful and dangerous European bison. For hours, Gediminas tracked his quarry through the valley of Sventaragis at the confluence between the two rivers, named the Neris and the Vilna. The hunt took him through a sacred forest believed by some to be the burial ground of the ancient dukes of Lithuania, going back to Sventaragis himself, a late member of the legendary Palaemonid dynasty. As later legends tell, the Palaemonids had left Rome during the time of the Emperor Nero, founding the civilization that would become the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. The hunt had taken Gediminas many miles from his capital of Trakai, through this sacred wood, until finally the great beast was cornered and slain at the top of a great hill. By the time the hunt was over, it was too late to return home, so Gediminas lay down in the ancient forest, surrounded by the graves of his ancestors, and slept at the base of the great hill. And as he slept, he dreamed. In his dream, Gediminas saw a great wolf Covered in plates of iron armor, standing at the top of the hill, the wolf opened its jaws, raised its massive head towards the moon, and howled. The howls of the enormous beast were louder than the howls of 100 wolves, shaking the countryside for miles around. Gediminas awoke in a sweat. He sent for his childhood friend, Lizdeka. As a pagan priest, Lizdeka would know about such matters. Lizdeka's origins are even more shrouded in mist than Gediminas' own. According to legend, Gediminas' father had found the infant Lizdeka in an eagle's nest and raised him as his own son. "I have dreamed a strange dream," the Grand Duke said to his friend, and told the priest what he had seen. "Do not fear," said the priest, when Gediminas told him of his dream. "This iron wolf is a strong and fortified city, which you will build at the top of this hill. The sound of his howl is the fame of the city, which will be spread abroad throughout the whole earth, and distant lands will quake in fear when they hear its name." The Grand Duke Gediminas believed the dream and its interpretation and lost no time in bringing it to fulfillment. He built a fortification on top of the hill which now bears his name, and soon a settlement and then a town sprang up around the tower, which was ideally situated to command the passage of 2 rivers. From one of these rivers, the Vilna, the city took its name, Vilnius. As generations passed, the dream of the Iron Wolf seemed to come true. Vilnius grew in fame and glory and became the capital of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, the center of what would become for a time the largest state in Europe. But this was only the beginning. I have to say, everybody, that what I just read was put together. I mean, you didn't invent this story, but this was put together. This rendition of it was written by Deacon Seraphim. I mean, well done.
I was sitting there listening. I was like, this sounds really cool. Why does it? Oh, it's because I wrote it. That's yeah. Right. So I went out there and I looked for when we were putting the podcast together. I looked for just some version of the retelling that we could use in the podcast, and basically, most of them were like translations of translations of translations, and they were just, very quick summaries of things. And there was no it just didn't feel like a dream that you would have in an actual misty forest in Europe. And so I just decided to just write my own version of the story, and I love it. It's one of my favorite things there.
I love it.
It's so cool.
I mean, and the thing is, like, you and I went there. So if you go to Vilnius,
been to the hill.
That's right. You can go up to this very hill. So, I mean, think about what this must be like, right? Imagine you're a Lithuanian listener, and maybe some of you are. So, welcome, my people.
I do have at least one Lithuanian individual who comes to almost all of my Symbolic World classes.
Nice.
And Vytautas is his name.
Oh, Vytautas is a great Lithuanian name.
Lithuanian name. Every time I see it in the chat, I'm like, ooh.
Vytautas Didysis.
Yes.
The great. But imagine you're a Lithuanian, okay, and you live in Vilnius, actually, as many Lithuanians do. I mean, that's the center of population. Vilnius is in the southeastern part of the country. And you've been hearing the story of the Iron Wolf your whole life, and you go, and you can climb up, or there's actually a kind of an elevator too, but you can climb up on top of this hill which was a hill fort at one point, and on there is a tower, which is the last remnant.
Steep hill, by the way,
of a castle. Yes, climbing that hill. I have now climbed the hill twice, and I took the elevator once.
And one assumes that they probably made it steeper, because it was a fort
on purpose. A fort, exactly.
But it's quite steep.
It's difficult. It's difficult for sure. And you can go up there, and you can stand in the very place where this legend happened. Like, this is the founding legend of your country, if you're Lithuanian, well, at least of Vilnius in particular. It really is of the country in some ways.
Actually, the most controversial thing in the whole retelling is when I said the center of what would become for a time the largest state in Europe, because, of course, what's the real first capital of Lithuania? And, what was the capital when it was the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth? Those are all hotly debated question.
But this is a mythic. So but I mean, this is part of the way that myth works, right? You can't marginalize it like that, when you're telling a story. But you can go up there and you can stand there and you can hear the wind. And I mean, you feel the wind, you hear the wind, and you almost have a sense of the wolf's howl.
Yeah.
Really. Right?
It's a great place to stand too, because you can just see everything for miles.
You can see everything. You can see the rivers. So there's the Vilna, also called the Vilnala, and then the Neris, and then they come. So what happens is the Vilna flows into the Neris. The Vilna actually extends down into what is now Belarus, and it comes to Vilnius, and it flows into the Neris from there, and then the Neris flows from there to Kaunas, where it flows into the Nemunas, and then that flows out to the Baltic Sea, ultimately. And so these rivers are really important part of Lithuanian topography. They define the shape of the land. Standing up on that hill, it's called Gediminas Hill, and it's Gediminas Tower. Like this, it's really a powerful thing. You can see these rivers, and you can see how they shape the city.
You can also see how this would have been an ideal position for a fortification.
Absolutely,
because you can basically control the passage of either river.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. And I mean, one thing I'll say, we've told a lot of stories on this podcast, and we're going to tell many, 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 many more. But this is going to be one of the very few that we're going to tell where we can say, yeah, we went there. We were there. We actually stood there and, had this moment. So, okay. All right. This is a founding myth, right? Why a dream? Like, why a hunt? I mean, there's all these things that are going on here. But yeah, founding myths are totally a thing. Like you, for instance, described the founding myth that's given in the Aeneid of the hearth and all this stuff. So this is not an epic, right? This is not some big long poem. This is a relatively short story, and yet this is the story that founds Vilnius in particular. Which actually Vilnius it just celebrated like 2 years ago, celebrated its 700th birthday.
Yeah.
1323 is like when this happens. So this is a medieval story, actually, everybody. Yeah. This is not some ancient thing. This is a medieval story. And yeah. So, okay. I think one of the things that's really important about this is, and I think this myth, this legend for me typifies the place that Lithuania has as the last pagan nation in Europe, more than probably any of the other stories that I've heard from Lithuania. Because this is clearly a pagan story. Lizdeka is a pagan priest. He's functioning as the interpreter of dreams. This is a very pagan priest thing to do. And I have to point out, by the way, that ending, that Eka ending on his name, Lizdeka, this is the ending of my family's ancestral name, which is Domeka, traditionally. Mm-hmm. We're not Damic, historically. It's Domeka. So this is a very, very old Lithuanian name ending. I just had to put that out there. And like, okay, well, let's go back to your fundamentalist Baptist upbringing, Deacon Seraphim, and like say, okay, there's this pagan story with this wolf, and now we're going to put this emblem everywhere in our country. Like, how many Iron Wolf statues are there in Vilnius? I don't even know. There's a lot.
It's not as bad as putting a Christmas tree in every house on Christmas Eve. I mean, that's
so true. I mean, it's everywhere. I mean, I'm wearing, I can't show you because it's in my casting, but I'm wearing an Iron Wolf t-shirt right now, right? So, but also like there's the Iron Wolf Brigade, who is one of the military units of the Lithuanian
army.
And
there's what as sort of related to this, one of the cool things is that the patron saint of Vilnius is Saint Christopher, because who else would it be? And of course, Saint Christopher is in many legends and in some iconography, although it's mildly controversial, is depicted as having the head of a dog, right? Or being a sort of a wolf man. And so the fact that Vilnius's patron saint is Saint Christopher made sort of perfect sense to me. It is it kind of fits with Lithuania's identity, especially during the Middle Ages, as being
the redeemed wolf.
Liminal space, the space that's kind of on the edge of, being on the edge of Western Christian Europe, and also on the edge of like the East. Like, it's just kind of this weird transitional space,
and also the edge of Christianity, the last edge of Christianity and paganism in Europe.
Yeah,
I mean, I think it's interesting. So let's break it down a little bit in technical terms. I think is important. I mean, what makes paganism paganism? It's not certain symbols. It's not certain themes. That's not what paganism, like the essence of true paganism is. The essence of true paganism is offering sacrifices to your gods, participating in those sacrifices. It's about worship. It's not about you have this title or this image or this whatever. I mean, they're in the Bible. There are pagan titles and images and stuff that get reapplied to God himself. That happens in the Bible. So God clearly has no problem doing that.
Yeah, it's important to... this story in particular is very interesting. Obviously, you can sort of like see Romulus Remus sort of connections to it, which is definitely
a little wilder.
Well,
a little wilder.
Well, wait, this is wilder?
Well, okay. I don't know. Let's think about it.
He wasn't raised by the wolf.
He wasn't raised by the wolves. He's not suckled on wolves. Yeah. That's true. So on that level, it's not as wild. But
and also, he doesn't have to murder anyone to find the boundaries of a city like Romulus does. So
I know. But it is wilder in the sense that, like, well, okay, maybe wilder is not the word I want. But it is a little bit wilder in the sense that this starts with this hunt. It's this a visionary experience, a direct contact with the divine. There's that going on, and it's on the edge of the world. It's an edge of the world kind of thing. Yeah. But yeah, it's true that it's actually a kind of in some sense, a more humanistic story, right? Because it begins with this hunt, not with his vulnerability. Right, which the Romulus and Remus, it's exposed in the wilderness and vulnerability and so forth. So it begins with him in charge. He's already the Grand Duke. This is not how he ascends his throne. He's already got a capital, which is not even Trakai is not even the first capital of Lithuania, probably the second, maybe even the third. Vilnius is probably the fourth capital of Lithuania, and the sixth, because Kaunas becomes the capital of Lithuania in the interwar period, and then Vilnius comes back.
Like I said, this is a somewhat controversial question. Yeah,
I know.
I think something that some scholars have pointed out about the story is that it does have sort of some of these shamanistic overtones. So you have the figure of Lizdeka in particular, who kind of got really blown up as being the most interesting character in the story as part of like late 19th century romantic, Baltic nationalism, neo-paganism, et cetera, et cetera.
But there's no statue of Lizdeka.
No
in Cathedral Square in Vilnius.
There's a lot of funny art of him where he looks like Gandalf, though, which is quite fun.
That's right.
But I mean art from that late 19th century. But Lizdeka, who there's this legend about him that he's found either in the cradle of a tree by Gediminas' father, or that he's found in an eagle's nest, right? And so the idea is like he's already half wild, so he does have that sort of Romulus Remus, like raised by animals, like half wild, kind of a thing, and that's why he's the one that's able to interpret what's going on here, and he has this shamanistic identity.
But I think it's notable that he's a kind of secondary figure.
Yes, that's right.
Like Gediminas is really is what this story is about.
Yeah.
And Lizdeka doesn't even like offer a sacrifice or anything like that in the midst of this. He just offers. He's basically a professional that Gediminas turns to and says, "Explain this to me."
Yeah.
And this may well be because this is how the story gets remembered. That this is how the story gets remembered. Gediminas is one of the founding figures of Lithuania. He's not the founding figure. Mindaugas is probably the founding figure. He's the first and only king of Lithuania from the 13th century. But Gediminas is the one who founds Vilnius, of course. So he's a big deal. And then his dynasty, the Gediminid dynasty, these are historical people, by the way, everybody. These are real historical people. These are not like Sovijus. Probably there's no Sovijus. Who knows?
I mean, I wouldn't go that far. Father,
okay. But I mean, I'll just say that, I mean, we're talking about medieval figures, that there's lots and lots of evidence that they existed. I mean, we have a letter written by Gediminas inviting people to come move to Vilnius.
Well, this is why I said in the story that, he steps out of myth and into history, right? And so there is some kind of a dividing line between those two places. And I personally don't think that just because something is in a myth category that you write it off or you say this person didn't exist. But
of course,
obviously, at some point you start having, hey, no, listen, we have a thing this guy wrote, like we have his handwriting. Well, okay, it's a different kind of figure or somebody that we can maybe relate to a little bit more. The whole purpose of figures being mythical is that mythical figures by necessity lose their specificity. So you have like somebody like Sovijus or any of these kind of mythical figures who can serve as as part of it. I mean, that is also a culture founding narrative, right? Like, what do we get? Well, we get divination, we get fire, we get cremation, right? Which the way that you dispose of your dead is one of the things that makes you a culture, right?
Yes.
And so. And this should be a sobering thought for people living in the United States, where it's like, where the way that we do things is very. I mean, we don't just practice cremation like the ancient pagans practiced cremation, where everybody would be around the funeral pyre and you'd be singing wailing lamentation songs, and you would actually have to smell the body of your loved one as it roasts on the pyre. Like, that's got to be weird. But what we do is we take our dead to a professional who puts them in a giant oven, and we're not there for the process. We don't see anything that's happening. At the very end, they bring us, here's a little box with some ashes in it. You have no idea actually what those ashes are or where they came from. You're totally divorced from the process, right? And then you get together and you have like a little, hey, let's say some nice things about this person, and we're definitely sure that they're in heaven, which is what we always say at every funeral. And then everybody goes home, and you don't think about them anymore. Maybe you've got pictures of them in your house still, but you're totally disconnected from them, right? And this is basically it's not a culture. Like, this is an anti-culture,
right? And it's interesting. Like, I mean, I made mention that there are other capitals of Lithuania. Like, one of the one that historians think is probably the earliest one is Kernava, or it could be Kernava. I asked, I was like, how do you pronounce this? They're like, well, some people say it this way. Some people say it this way. And and I went there on my second trip to Lithuania. Actually, you and I, unfortunately, did not go there together. But and Kernava is interesting. Like, it has multiple hill forts that are all right next to each other. It's beautiful, beautiful place. And it's possibly the earliest capital of Lithuania, maybe the second. There's also this place called Voruta, which is sort of this legendary first capital. They're not sure if that existed or if Kernava was that place or whatever, in any event. But one of the things that's interesting about Kernava is that they did a whole bunch of archaeology on the place and discovered there were people clearly cremated. There are cremains there, but there also were burials also. And the burials indicated Christian burial. And so even though, like, we have stories about the introduction of Christianity to Lithuania, there's archaeological indications that it's even earlier, that there were Christians there.
Right.
And that the pagans let them dispose of their dead in the Christian way. Right. So it's an interesting thing where archaeology, we've got graves that are kind of showing that here you have two cultures and they are two cultures. You've got pagans and Christians that are they're living next to each other. They are interfacing, they're competing on some level, but it's another edge of the world kind of thing. It's absolutely fascinating. I mean, we'll actually, cremation figures into some of this analysis too of this story. We'll get to that in a second. I wanted to talk about the Wisent. So that's Wisent for people who haven't. There's also another pronunciation of as Wiesent or something like that.
Yeah, Wiesent.
Yeah. So this is they basically don't exist any. Well, maybe.
I think they've been working on a project to sort of bring them back. So they are. Well, in America we call them buffalo, or sometimes you have the term bison. These things are huge. They are bigger than horses. They are bigger than horses and much more muscular. Like, these are like tanks.
okay, in the animal world, but they can go much faster than the average tank, I think, probably.
They're also called the Zuber.
Oh, really? I've not heard that one.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's a really, this is a big, dangerous thing.
Yeah.
You know, like this is bigger than a wild boar, right? And this is how it begins, is with hunting.
They're not extinct. They're currently they have some basically preserves in Northern Europe where you can still see them.
Go see them. Okay. Okay.
But I mean they were hunted almost to extinction at some point.
Yeah.
Now this is not to be confused. There's also something called an aurochs.
Yes,
an aurochs,
sort of ancient cattle, or
it looks like a big longhorn cow. And it's also from Northern Europe, but they are extinct, and so that's why sometimes people.
Okay. Yeah. So I mean, this story starts with this hunt, and so there's. I just want to take a second to interpret this detail. So number one, this is not a wild hunt in the traditional sense. So the wild hunt, for those of you who aren't familiar with this trope from mythology, a wild hunt is not simply hunting in the wild. A wild hunt is a divine hunt. So it's either divine beings that are hunting for something, right? Or it's humans that are being led on by some kind of divine being, you know, like a white stag, or a god or a goddess who's appearing often as a stag. You know, and so actually the story of Saint Eustathius and his family includes this sort of divine hunt imagery, because you've got the stag with the cross and its antlers, you know.
And that terminology, by the way, originates with the Brothers Grimm.
Okay.
In their Deutsche mythology, their Germanic mythology, which is not as good as their Germanic dictionary, but anyway, they sort of like take all of these different stories and sort of generalize and say that maybe this is some part of like original Teutonic or Germanic paganism, but we don't really know.
Don't really know.
That's actually that's almost the only speculation about Easter being the name of a Germanic goddess also comes from that book. So they there's a lot more guesswork involved in that than there is in their dictionary. That's why I said it's not as good. But anyway, but certainly this idea that there's this motif that you're hunting for something the divine, or more often the hunt is being perpetrated by people who are divine. But even like the hunting of the white stag and things like this. Or part of this kind of idea.
So this is not quite that, because it's not a magical beast. There's no indication that it's a magic. I mean, it's, as far as we know, it has the standard number of spleens. We don't know. We don't. It's not. Yeah. But as far as we know, but so what does this mean? Okay, so this is Gediminas as the guy who can get resources, the guy who can successfully get things for you. And which is a thing that a king, or in this case, a Grand Duke, needs to be. You know, he's the provider. I mean,
in some sense, every hunt is a wild hunt or is a magical hunt. And what I mean by that is like the basic action of hunting, right? Is this going out into the wild and taking something that is not a part of you, and then integrating it into your story, integrating it into your pattern. And what makes the wild hunt, like for instance, the story of Saint Eustathius in particular, what makes that story, which by the way, of course, there's a reference to that, and also I think it's Saint Hubert. I could be wrong about this, but it's a very similar story. But that's the Jägermeister logo.
Yes, right.
That's what that's. Yeah, there's a stag with the cross between its antlers. So the idea with the wild hunt is basically, you go out into the wild, but then the thing that you encounter there integrates you into its pattern.
Yeah.
Right. That's the difference between the hunt and then the wild hunt or the divine hunt.
Yeah. I should mention, by the way,
very dangerous thing, hunting. You never know what you're going to meet out there.
That's true. I should mention, by the way, for those of you who like the story of Saint Eustathius and his family, which is a great story.
It's one of my favorites.
Yeah, it's so cool. I mean, and I was not asked to say this, but Ancient Faith has published a graphic novel called The Cross and the Stag, which is exactly the story. So you should. Yeah, I didn't write it. I didn't illustrate it. I'm just telling you, it's great. It's so good. My kids love it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, if you like this kind of storytelling, you would definitely like this. Okay, so the last detail I wanted to cover with this story, this kind of brings us back to this whole cremation thing, and even maybe to Sovijus, maybe, don't know, just throwing that out there, and that is that this valley that this happens in is called the Valley of Šventaragis. Okay, so the Valley of Šventaragis is the valley that is at the confluence of these two rivers, the Vilna and the Neris. Okay, it is possible that there may be some kind of mythic or thematic merging of these figures. They may be. So Šventaragis is supposedly this kind of mythical ancestor, maybe, of Gediminas. We should at some point talk about the whole Palamonid story. I think that would be very, very interesting.
Yeah, for sure. We'll do that after the Aeneid, Father.
Oh, wow. Okay. So Aeneid's next then, right? No.
Yeah. The Palamonid
no
thing
problem.
is just Aeneid fanfic. That's all it is.
No problem. So the reason why it's maybe connected is that this valley is the place where Šventaragis and his descendants are supposedly not truly buried, but actually that their cremains are stowed away.
Right.
Although I don't like that word cremains, but I mean, it's the word we've got. And supposedly, so he's cremated. What's to say that again?
It feels weird.
It does feel weird. It's a weird word. A lot of portmanteaus feel strange to me. But in any event, so he gives order that he be cremated and that cremation be established as the norm. And so that's part of what kind of associates him with Sovijus, is that there's a sense that this establishes cremation as the norm. So he tells his son Skirmantas to build a temple to Perkunas and to have him. So the temple, I guess, is some kind of crematorium, apparently, to have him and the other subsequent Grand Dukes, buried there and cremated and then buried. Their cremated remains buried there. And so, okay, why is this an interesting story? It's not just that it links Gediminas back to this legendary ancestor, okay? There's actually something deeper in terms of the imagery and the thematic going on here, I think. And that is that, and this was, I think, something that was mentioned in our episode with Martin Shaw, right? Is that what is this place? It's like a burial ground, and the city rises up out of it, right? And so you've got this kind of decomposition going on, this place of death and so forth, but then life comes up out of it. And even, honestly, even something that's burned, like ashes actually are a fertilizer,
Yep.
So they are. So I think at some level what part of the imagery that's being participated in here is this sort of fertilizer imagery. The composted ancestors, as it were.
Not to weird anybody out, but you always have you can't build a new city or a new civilization without dead bodies. And what I mean by this is that you have to the foundation of anything always has to be built on the ashes or the remains of and so in really vivid stories, this is just before the episode I was reading a little bit from a Serbian epic poem, which was translated into German and actually sent to the Brothers Grimm. So I can't read Serbian, but I can read German. And so I've been reading through this epic, and it's an epic about the founding of this particular fortress in Serbia. And, it has this motif, which is very common actually in the Balkans, of a fortress or sometimes even a church or something like that is being built. And the structure can't be built without a sacrifice. And so then the mason or the architect, the person who's in charge of building it all, he basically has to have sacrifice his wife to the project. And so he puts his, wife, inside the wall or something like that. And then the building is able to be built. There's stories like this actually in Celtic Christianity. There's particularly the founding of the monastery of Iona on Iona involves a story like this that's quite dark. But there are versions of the story, in every world culture, and you can think about the same kind of idea when we say something. When Tertullian said the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church, he did not mean this in an abstract way. What he literally meant was, if you kill a Christian, we will build a church over their bones.
Right. And well, it's fascinating to contrast that with what the pagans literally, at least I know pagan Romans and Greeks did this, is often when they were building great temples or municipal buildings, they would kill a slave and throw them down in underneath the four corners.
That's the best case scenario, because often they would just bury them alive under the foundation and then they would suffocate to death slowly.
Yeah. Whereas Christianity is saying, okay, if you kill us, we're going to build on that.
Yes. Yeah.
Not we're going to kill you and build on it.
Yeah.
But if you kill us, we're going to build on it. And you know, and churches are built over martyrs' graves, saints' graves in general. And of course, we have relics inside our altars and in the Undimension. Like life is being built on top of death. And of course, the life that comes out of the death is Christ.
I was thinking about this today when we were was serving the Divine Liturgy. I mean, this is heavily in my mind because today was my first time running solo, you know, as a deacon, and one of the relics in our altar is Saint Elizabeth, the New Martyr, who my family dearly loves. I feel a great kinship to her in many respects, not the least because she's a convert from Protestantism, and you know, anyway, wonderful saint, wonderful martyr, and just thinking, you know, as we're serving the liturgy, you know, and calling down the Holy Spirit on the gifts, and all these things are happening, and we're standing right there over the bones also of the martyrs. I mean, it's just an incredible thing to think about. Yeah. So you have to have, this is just a way to say it is it's an essential pattern. It's sort of like you could only ever build a city on a place where the dead have been buried, right? That's just how it works.
I think the last thing I'll say, because this just came into my mind as you were saying, the last thing we'll say about this story. I think one of the experiences that we had, and this is in episode 5 of the Wolf on the Cross documentary, everybody. One of the experiences that we had is that we went to the town of my ancestors, which is Kudirkos Nomistis. And the reason we went there was to go to the cemetery. We went to the cemetery and we combed through it for probably half an hour, 45 minutes.
Well,
a
couple hours
maybe.
Than that, Father.
It was a long time.
It was a while.
And then finally we found the ancestral grave of my family, you know, and we stood there over the bones of my ancestors, and we sang for them. We sang, you know, a memorial for them, and at that moment, I felt a renewal of life standing there on death, you know, and this connection to them. And
it's a terrible thing about our culture that because we move all over the place, and because we just have these mass cemeteries where we can put our dead and forget about them, unlike Lithuanian cemeteries, by the way, where people come, you know, like often.
They're the best. Yeah,
so
you go at least twice a year. At least twice a year you go. You go on the tradition is you go the first couple of days of November, which is the feasts of All Saints and All Souls. And both Orthodox and Catholics go because those are their feast days, but Orthodox also go because it's their culture, Lithuanian culture. And then you also go traditionally on the anniversary of their departure.
The Lithuanian cemeteries that we visited were more beautiful than most Protestant churches that I've been inside.
They're just beautiful. Yeah, and so strange. Incredibly manicured. They're like every single grave is a little garden. And if a grave falls into disrepair, this is considered a shame.
That was something that was really interesting to me, is that each family grave plot had a little tiny wall around it, like you would have around like a flower bed or something like that. And it's kind of like, this is a little city, you know, this is the little family domain. Anyway, it's a terrible thing that our you know, that I couldn't tell you past, you know, a couple of, you know, basically one generation, where most of my ancestors are buried in the U.S. Now I can go on like Gravefinder and look around for them or something like that, but most of those places I've never been to.
Yeah,
and it is, it's just it's a very weird thing. Like, and this is what I mean. You know, when I say things like, you know, in many ways we're living in an anti-culture, people, you know, usually, it's like he's talking about gay marriage or something like that. Well, I am talking about that, I guess, but really I'm actually talking about this stuff. I'm talking about the fundamental things that you would need to actually be considered a civilization in the ancient world. We don't even have anymore.
The culture war stuff is downstream of this stuff. The reason we landed there is because we took off from here.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
You know, that's really what it comes down to. Okay,
Exactly.
okay. We did our myth. We did a myth.
Yeah.
We did a legend. Let's do a fairy tale. It's interesting how
Do we have time for the fairy tale?
Yeah, let's do the fairy tale.
Okay, all right.
I want to do this. I want to do this one. So read us the Swan Queen.
This is one of my favorite stories.
This is a great story.
So this story is going to begin the way that Lithuanian fairy tales traditionally begin. We say once upon a time. They say long ago in another time. There lived an old man and an old woman. Every morning they went out to the nearby forest together, kindling for their fire, and the moment they left the house, a white swan would come flying in. She would fold and put aside her wings, and turning into a beautiful maid, she would light the stove, cook the dinner, clean and wash everything, and then fly away again. The old people had not a care in the world, for they returned home each day to find everything done for them. But they were filled with wonder as to who their kind helper might be. One day, the old man decided to remain home alone, so he hid behind a tub and waited to see what would happen. After a time, who should come flying into the hut but the swan? She folded her wings, laid them aside, and turning into a beautiful maid, went to the well for water. And the old man at once took the wings and burnt them. The maid returned with 2 pails of water. She looked and saw that her wings were gone. She burst out crying and wept long and bitterly, for this meant that she was now parted from her mother and her father and her own dear love as well. But there was nothing she could do, so she stayed with the old people and lived with them as their daughter. Now the king himself was once out hunting near the forest, not far from where they lived. He saw the maid, and he liked her well, as kings are wont to do. And so he said to the old people, I must have this maid for my own. Give her to me, and you can have as much gold as you like. Well, the old people were filled with sorrow at this, but it is not good to refuse a king, especially where maids are concerned. And so the old people gave her to him. And the king brought her to his palace and married her, and in due time a son was born to them. One day, the queen came out into the garden with her baby son. Looking up, what did she see but a flock of swans flying near? At their head flew her old father himself, singing as he flew, In that garden bright my daughter I see, though she has no wings, yet swan is she. Her fingers are covered with golden rings, to her little son a song she sings. From a little gold book she reads him a tale, a kerchief of silk behind her trails. A pair of white wings to her I'll throw, and she'll leave her son, and with us she'll go. Now the queen's heart grew heavy. Tears poured from her eyes, and she sang out in reply, Do not throw me the wings, for you come too late. I won't leave my son to an orphan's fate. Just then the king came up to her and said, Why are your eyes red with weeping, my dear? Because he could see that something was wrong. Our little son cried, and it made me cry too, the queen replied. On the next day her mother flew over her, and on the days that followed her brother and her sisters, and they all sang the same song, but the queen refused to heed any of them each time. The last to come flying over her was her own dear love, and he sang as he flew, In that garden bright, my beloved I see, though she has no wings, yet swan is she. Her fingers are covered with golden rings, to her little son a song she sings. From a little gold book she reads him a tale, a kerchief of silk behind her trails. A pair of white wings to her I'll throw, and she'll leave her son, and with us she'll go. And the queen could no longer contain herself, and so she sang out in reply, A pair of wings throw down to me, and with you I'll fly beyond the sea. The swan, who was her own dear love, threw a pair of wings down to her, and she left her son and flew away with him. But her love met his death soon after, and her heart filled with sorrow again. As for the king, her husband, He waited and waited for her, but she did not come back, and so eventually he married a woman. And her name was Laume, and like all stepmothers, she was a witch. And the new stepmother took a dislike to her stepson immediately, treated him very badly. But every night the Swan Queen would come flying to the palace at night, fold her wings, wash and fondle her son, and then fly away again singing. The king and his wife repose in their bed. The palace guards, too, sleep the sleep of the dead. But every night and without fail, my only son, he sobs and wails. Then before flying away, she would lull her son to sleep, and he would not wake till she came back again, till at last the king began to wonder why his son slept so long. One night he saw the swan come flying into the palace. She changed into human shape, lulled her son to sleep, and then turned back again into a swan and flew away. So the king thought and thought how he could catch her and keep her. But he couldn't think of anything. He thought about setting his hunters upon her, but he loved her, and he didn't want to hurt her or harm her in any way. And so things proceeded in this way. Laume, the witch, mistreating her little stepson. The Swan Queen came each night to dry his tears and put him to sleep, and the king watched and loved her from afar. And as I said, things went on in this way for many nights and many days, until one day an old man came to the palace. Like all old men who come to palaces, he was a tinker. And like all tinkers, he was wise. And seeing that he was wise, the king asked him what he should do to catch the swan. The old man said, "Watch and see which of the windows the swan flies out of, and put some tar on the sill. Her wings will be glued to it. And if you seize her with your left hand and tear them off with your right hand, she will return to her human shape." The king did as the old man said. He put some tar on the windowsill, and when the swan's wings were glued to it, he seized her with his left hand and tore off her wings with his right hand, and lo, the swan turned back into his own queen again. So the king had Laume the witch put to death. 3 days later, he held a great feast. People came from near and far. The mead and ale were there in great quantities, so much so that they would run down and stain the front of your beard. And the Swan Queen lived in joy with her own dear son and never left her husband's people again.
Yeah. This is so... I don't know. It's sad. It's sad and it's joyful, and it's like you can't fix it. Like she's connected with in two different places, and there's nothing you can do about it because she's, yeah.
And one of the things that the story seems to be about is kind of this, the tension between wildness and domesticity.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So she's this wild thing. You can't pin her down, but she comes in and she does these domestic tasks like, cleaning and sweeping and putting things away, or coming in and, looking after her son. But then she flies away again.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, one of the things that struck me that is a way of kind of mediating some of this maybe is like when she goes back to her swan people, the king remarries, and it's so here's some backstory to this. The name that's given of the woman that he remarries, the stepmother, Laume. This is, now it's hard to tell because now we're in the realm of fairy tale and kind of folk tale and stuff. Okay. So once things kind of filter down to this point, it's not really mythology anymore, but the name that's here is a mythological name. And so that means that the original hearers of this, or whatever version that they heard, would at least be kind of tipped off. Okay, so Laume, or Laima, also called Laima, Laima, Laume or Laima, she is, in the mythological realm, she's a fate goddess. Okay, so she's like the fates in a lot of these other mythological stories. And what is she connected with? Well, she's connected with childbirth. She's connected with marriage, with pregnancy, but also with death. So all of this kind of this birth matrix of stuff. And matrix is a great word for that, because matrix means womb in Latin. And so, but what does fate have to do with her? Well, she doesn't do this in this story, but maybe we can figure out how it might be connected in some ways. She will prophesy the fate of newborns. And so, like when a baby is born, the idea is that Loma kind of says what the fate of this child is going to be, right? And this is the last thing I'll add, because I know you have a lot of thoughts about this story, that she's also connected with a figure called Gaguta, which is sort of this cuckoo goddess. Maybe the same figure, although some analysts say that they're two different figures. And the cuckoo is actually, the call of the cuckoo is sometimes connected with divination. Like it coos so many times, it calls so many times, then this happens, or this is going to happen, that kind of thing. So there's a certain sort of a divination element in all of this as well. And so it's interesting to me how the figure of Lauma in this story functions as a way to bring things back to the way that they're supposed to be by applying this kind of pressure. It's a dark pressure. It's a bad pressure, right?
Yeah.
Just like the fairy godmother in Cinderella. We should at some point do some of these fairy stories that everybody knows. And we should. Like the fairy godmother in Cinderella functions to pressure Cinderella ultimately so that she can become this princess.
Of course, in the original Grimm's retelling of Cinderella, it's not a fairy godmother at all.
Oh, I know.
It's a saint. But anyway, there are no fairies in Grimm's.
No.
No fairies in Grimm's.
No, I'm saying the stepmother is the one who applies this pressure.
Yeah.
Did I say fairy godmother?
You said fairy.
Oh, I meant the stepmother is the one who applies this pressure. Yeah. The pressure of darkness and of evil, right, which creates the opportunity for this transformation.
Right. I mean, the stepmother figure it's one of the most enduring tropes in fairy tales, and no shade to like actual stepmothers out there in the audience.
No.
Many, many wonderful women who came in and
absolutely,
into families and raised children that were not their own but became their own. But the point is that it's a foreign feminine, or it's a feminine that comes in from the outside and it mothers the wrong way. Right. It's basically just the dark feminine. Right. That's what the stepmother trope in these stories is. So one of the things the story is about is basically this question of, it's funny because I think that we sometimes think that, if we would tell this story nowadays, maybe we would try to tell a story about, the man is the wild thing that gets domesticated by the woman. But that's not what this story is. And I will just say, by the way, this story is every culture basically in the world has had a version of this story. And so in Northern Europe, it's always a swan or a goose. In Japan, it's a crane. In some cultures, it's a fox. It's a fox woman. She has a fox pelt. But basically every culture in the world, it seems, has some version of this story. There's some version of this sort of like beautiful, elusive woman with these ties to the natural world, or these ties to, like, she's not quite human. She has this other form. And if you can, if you don't, you could say like, the question is always like whether or not you're going to be able to successfully pin her down. So these stories don't end the same way. Very often, the majority of these stories end with she flies away and leaves the king, or leaves the husband, leaves the child brokenhearted, and never comes back. And sometimes she takes pity, and so she throws down enough feathers for him to make wings of his own and fly away with her.
I have to say, okay,
yes.
I just say an idea just came into my head, and I don't know if you were going to go in this direction, so forgive me if you were, but an idea just came into my head that on some level this represents a Christian version of this story, in which the Swan Queen can represent Christ, this person from the other world who comes in and makes things whole and puts things in order and so forth, and yet there's a tension between the union of this person from the other world and those in the earthly world that makes it so that it's not always a perfect match. And it's only when things are fully brought together then you have this harmony again. But it represents a humbling of the person from the other world in order to elevate those in the earthly world. Obviously, it's not a perfect one-to-one match. I'm not talking allegory here. It's not allegory.
Yeah, maybe.
But I my sense is maybe that there is this sense in which, it's about an elevation. The Son of God takes on humanity, empties himself, and then, but we want to replace him with our own desires, our own stepmother, our own, way of caring for ourselves that is not the right way, that is witchy, that is distorted, that is about all these other things. The king doesn't wait for his bride; he goes and remarries. He shouldn't do that. He shouldn't do that. And so, on some level, the king is the soul here, the human soul. I don't know. That's an interpretation that just occurred to me as you were saying that.
I
don't know if
I
that's
was not
crazy.
Going in that direction, and
Okay.
I don't know. I would have to think about that. About that. Which, by the way, since we mentioned Wayland in the past, Wayland also has a swan wife,
Wayland's my ancestor.
Well, actually, mine as well. There we are. We're cousins. But Wayland or Volander in Old Norse, he has a swan wife, as do his brothers, and they come across 3 swan maidens who take off their swan skins to go bathing, right? And the way that so this is what all these kinds of stories have in common, is that you have to get the pelt or the fell or the skin or the wings or whatever it is, like the animalistic thing. But I mean, with a swan, it's not animalistic in the same way that a fox is. This is, something. There's something beautiful and elusive and kind of heavenly about swans. By the way, I got into a brush with 2 very angry swans when I was in Lithuania, at Trakai, and so I feel like. I feel like that was just like it was a great moment. I keep geese here, by the way, and geese are quite large. But the baby swans were the size of my geese. Like swans are. If you've not been up close to a swan, they're huge and they're not to be trifled with.
Yeah, they're
not
mean.
To be trifled with. They're
meaner than geese.
Somebody put a snake on a balloon, and yeah. So swans are. There's something about swans that are graceful, beautiful, but also dangerous and elusive, all these different things. But the way that you capture the maiden, the way that you capture the swan wife or the swan maid, is by taking the wings, like taking the wings, taking the skin, taking the feathers.
Yeah. And
then there's always this fear that if she gets a hold of her wings or feathers again in some way. So in some versions of the story, the husband has to lock them in a chest, and then he says, "You're not allowed to ever open this chest." And eventually she opens the chest and she finds her pelt and runs away or something like that. But this is that idea that So what's interesting to me about the Lithuanian version of this fairy tale is the way that it ends, which is that she gets her wings taken away from her, but this time she seems to be happy. She seems to be sort of reconciled. And so this is sort of the story of integration and integrating the feminine. So you have these 2 different versions of the feminine in the story, and neither one of them are properly integrated in a way that would allow the kingdom to cohere. So you have the Swan Queen, who is very happy to have a child, but every time she looks up and she sees the swans flying overhead, she's weeping because she still feels like that's the world that she belongs to. Why? Because she's still got her love there. She's still got her lover there, right? And so it's after the death of that lover, and then her attention is now oriented solely, her love is oriented solely towards her son, that she's able to domesticate. And this is something the king has to do. He has to tame her, essentially, right? It's one way to think of this story is something like The Taming of the Shrew, the Shakespeare play. It's that same motif. It's that same kind of basic shape, where it's the job of the man, it's the job of the masculine figure in the story to take something that's beautiful but also wild and dangerous and make a place for it, and then tame it to the extent that it can integrate without totally breaking it. And so that's when this story doesn't have a happy ending, which very often it does not. It seems to be something like the husband, goes too far and he tries to hold on too closely, or he, there is also a variant of the story where the husband doesn't realize that his wife is the crane or the swan or the fox, and so he discovers. By the way, I think swans would be a sweet Great Tales mascot. I'm just going to put that out there. I really
now there's a competition.
Ever since first reading about the Swan Knights of Dol Amroth in the Lord of the Rings, like swans have kind of been my thing, and I try to work them into as much as I can in my own writing and game design.
Although the national animal of Lithuania, as you probably know, is the stork.
Is the stork? Yeah, I did.
The stork.
Yeah. But yeah, the swan, or sometimes in some versions the stork, the crane, the goose, the fox, etc. Right, all these kinds of animals. Sometimes the husband just doesn't know, and then when he discovers it, and he discovers the wife's true nature, he's the one that drives her out. So there's some very interesting variations of the story, but they all seem to basically have in question this idea of like, how do you integrate the feminine, where the feminine is presented as something that's, because there are ways of representing the feminine in stories where the feminine is the domestic, safe, mothering thing, but also the feminine is also wild and chaotic and unpredictable and dangerous, and that's why it's beautiful to us, right? And so you have these kind of different aspects, and these stories all seem to be about how do you take this beautiful thing in and integrate it without breaking it or without driving it away? It's something like that. I mean, I think that these stories and this, I can't stress enough, this myth, some version of it comes up over and over and over again in basically every human civilization.
I feel like in some ways.
Sometimes she's a seal, by the way, in like Ireland.
Oh yeah. Well, we're gonna have to. I mean, I feel like in some ways. I have to tread carefully here, but I feel like in some ways this is a myth about marriage.
Of course it is.
I mean, because, like, classically speaking, every man wants the. It's funny. It's funny to me. Okay, maybe I won't tread so carefully now. I don't know. We'll see. It's funny to me.
We're 3 hours in, so like you can say whatever you want now.
No, we're only 2 hours in.
We're in the third hour is what I meant.
Okay. No, it's funny to me, like there's so much discussion going on right now in our culture about what men and women are and ought to be, about what marriage is and ought to be, and all of this kind of stuff. And so, like, speaking from a man's point of view, like there's all this stuff out there about men who want trad wives, right? Or something like this. And I get that. Especially as a reaction to a lot of what's going on in the world. I get it. I understand that. And there are women, of course, who also will say, I'm a trad wife and and whatever. Okay. But I think that when you push these images too far in one direction or another, then what you get is the broken, like it seems like this is a very fragile story that if it's on, to use language we know well, it stands on the edge of a knife. That if you push it too far in one direction or another, what you get is an unhappy ending.
Right.
And this version, this Lithuanian version, preserves both the wildness, the swanness of the queen. She is still the Swan Queen.
Right.
And also her family element, her domesticity, like they're both at the same time. And that yes, in the story, the king tears off her wings. All right. But what really brings her back is her. She could have just flown away and that would be it.
Yeah. And it's the sun. It's the
sun. It's like that connection, that's the thing that brings them together. So I think that in some ways this is a beautiful image for married people that and it's not just about, like in this story, it's the Swan Queen. It's not the king, the bear king or whatever, right? But that's a thing too. There is for men to be married, there has to be both this and like this is part of what's going on in the Iron Wolf, right? He's a hunter, but then he's going to become a king, like a duke. He has to become connected to his land. He can't just be the hunter. He has to be the person connected to the land. So I think that then he's going for both men and women. Is that yes? There's a certain wildness that we keep, right? But it needs to be integrated. That's the word you used. It needs to be integrated together with the settledness as well. To put it in Hobbit terms, you need both the Baggins and the Took.
Yeah, I mean so I do have to tread carefully here because my wife is listening right now. Okay. But I mean, listen, I remember being a teenager and being really into this girl who is now my wife, encountering her beauty as this like wild and dangerous and kind of overwhelming thing. But also the fact that actually there's all these other guys that are also interested in her, and that sort of like that how can I make her mine, and the urge to do that in a way that would be like smothering or oppressive, or like when somebody does this in a way like where they're like, oh, you're stalking her or something like that. But that's the idea, right? Is that there's a way that you could try to. Yeah, she just said hi in the chat. There's a way that you could try to make somebody yours, but what you really want is to possess them, right? Yeah. And then if you do that the wrong way, then eventually it'll sour in some way. But you have to do it like a little bit, right? He does have to take the wings off, and so you're not allowed to. It's the reason that the story ends happily is because their other lover dies, and we don't know how he dies, although I have a theory about that, but the reason the story ends happily is her other lover dies, and so there isn't actually anything that's pulling her out that way anymore, and so now she's able to give her wings up. But like I said, in some versions of the story, there's one version of the story I think it's from the Mari people, who are Finno-Ugric people who lived along the Volga, and their version of the story goes something like, basically kind of like the story we've read, that except that in this case, she does fly away, but when she's flying away, she sees that the king is weeping, and so she throws down enough feathers to him that he's able to make his own wings and follow her, right? Yeah,
so that's another version of
it's another version,
integration.
Yeah. But I mean, I think that also, like all good fairy tales, this one, I mean, really resists. It's hard to talk about. It really resists analysis in that way. But when you read it, I think especially if you're married or you've ever been in love, like when you read it, there's something about it that makes a deep sense. Like this is a deeply true kind of a story. And this kind of folktale, which I believe is, I wrote this down in my notes earlier. This is it's type AT400 on the International Arndt Thompson Index. Okay. So anyway, if that's helpful to anybody, and it is not helpful to anybody. But this kind of folktale is one of my favorites, and I actually love to mention Dr. Martin Shaw again. He's got a couple of different versions of it in his Bard School book. But to me, it's one of the most wonderful and perplexing, elusive, but also it's a story that is so intuitively honest that it's hard to talk about, because it's like you're just talking about the most obvious thing. Yeah. So, anyway,
I know we went a little long today, but I wanted, not just because we had this sense of this progression of myth, legend, fairy tale, or folk tale, but I thought that this was a great one to end on. Yeah. And I think you get, because we wanted to try to introduce people to this set of stories, which I think is probably mostly unknown to a lot of our audience.
Absolutely.
but we're gonna be back. We will definitely be going back to Lithuania.
We'll definitely come back to Lithuania. That's for
sure. Exactly. So let's check in with the chat, and actually,
the old chat here.
I looked over and scrolling back towards the beginning. Sam Cook, I think, was trying to troll me when he said Lithuania was part of the British Empire, right? That's how it ended up in the Commonwealth.
Oh, jeez.
I'm not going to believe that someone. He had to have been trolling.
Sam is a smart guy. He's definitely trolling you.
All right. Yes.
Yeah.
Different Commonwealth for the rest of
He also says, "Hi, Deacon, very tired. I'm Sam." So there you go. He's definitely.
Yeah. Nathaniel, your co-parishioner there, he says very kindly, he says, "I can attest, if you haven't listened to The Wolf and the Cross, you should. One of the best podcast or documentaries they put out, 10 out of 10. So, yeah, I think that if y'all love this podcast, you're going to love that documentary. It's a related kind of storytelling.
And by the way, many more documentaries to come.
Oh, indeed. We have a lot more stories to tell.
I'm already making plans about our next project. Like I'm already making plans. We'll talk.
Yeah. Let's see. Okay. Commenting on what they call sky burial in Zoroastrianism, Trivium Takeout has a couple of comments. He says Herodotus talked about the Persians doing the burials in the Towers of Silence. That's the term I couldn't remember. Towers of Silence. It's such a provocative term. And then he says it's kind of inverse.
Solid name for a fantasy trilogy, by the way.
Or some kind of like metal band.
Yeah,
like
no. Fantasy
band.
trilogy for sure.
Okay. And then he says it's kind of inverse to the parallel of the rich man and Lazarus. It is the rich man who becomes the intercessor for his family. Yeah, so he's talking about the Soviet Smith here.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's the normal way it's supposed to work, actually. You know, that's what you see Job doing even before Job dies. Like,
indeed.
Yep.
Let's see what else.
That idea of the pater familias, which is one of my favorite terms in sort of like British 20th century literature. It's used very disparagingly usually. Like, oh, this, like for some heavy-handed father figure. But actually this idea of like the father as being the patriarch of the family and the person whose job it is to like intercede and pray for everyone is very beautiful. And that is, of course, ultimately that's what our bishops and that's what our priests are doing.
Exactly.
Like imaging in the family of God.
Exactly. I see our producer, Simon. So just a shout out to Simon, our YouTube producer. And of course,
oh, yes,
Mike, our audio producer. Simon says, if the podcast has an oracular pig as a mascot, it's got to be Hen Wen.
It does have to be Hen Wen. But just to point out, Trivium Takeout says the mug has a boar helm. Like Beowulf literally has a boar helm in this. See? Again, very cool mug.
Magical pig.
Okay, all right.
I'm just throwing that out there.
You're winning me over. But also swans.
Swans. I know. Well, this could become,
we actually
vote
have somebody
everybody
else who has already done some art that they've sent to me to propose as a mascot. Yes. So I sent it to you a few weeks ago, but it was right in the middle of a lot of your travels and illnesses. So we'll have to talk about it again. But I think a mascot would be cool. I definitely want Great Tales merch.
I think that could potentially be a thing.
I think I want Great Tales merch. If we can figure out like all the business side of stuff with Ancient Faith, I think merch would be cool.
I mean, YouTubers, what do you guys think? Would you like to buy like a Great Tales T-shirt, or is that a thing that you would like?
A cool way to support Ancient Faith Ministries, and
yeah. I don't know.
Let's see here.
I have to say, I don't know who Trivium Takeout is, but I love your handle. That's great.
I'm actually wondering if that's not the Timbre and Bindery folks.
They were summoned by you mentioning them.
Yeah, maybe. I'm not actually sure, but let's see. Yeah, Trivium Takeout mentions the Irish salmon of wisdom from the Fian McComball story. Significant analog to the Paschal Mystery, the Eucharistic Feast. Yes, I have an episode planned about the Salmon of Wisdom.
Yes.
At some point, we will be doing that.
Yep.
Let's see. Yeah, President Foxman says, you want to host a banquet? Let me tell you a quick story of how I got home from war first. Yeah, that's basically the Odyssey summarized.
Right. Yes, exactly.
All right.
Yeah.
So there was actually a pretty good question in here from Alexandra. She says, I still haven't got my head around this overlap between historical and mythical and how both of those categories are real. They clearly are, but do we mean the same thing by real in each case? I don't know. What does real mean?
Yeah. I mean, here's what I'll say, Alexandra, is to me, what we call historical, okay, and what we call mythical are ultimately two different tones or voices, as it were, of doing the same thing, right? They're both telling stories that are about how we got here. And the here is not just like how was mankind created? That's definitely an important myth. It's important history, but also how we got here. Like, why is our culture doing what it does? Why do we think the way we think? Why do we talk the way that we talk? Right? That is what all of history and myth is, but they have different kind of tones to them.
Yeah.
Like the way that we tell stories that we classify as myths has a particular character. And we do it for particular purposes. We want people to listen in a certain way when we tell the story that way. So, for instance, I'll give you an example of a story that I'm working on, and I'm not going to tell you what. I mean, I mentioned it last time, but like I could begin by giving a historical approach and saying something like, okay, there are certain legends found in the Jewish Talmud that Jonah may have been one of the boys raised by either Elijah or Elisha. I could say that. That is a very historical kind of tone, right? Or I could also say, it is told in the tales of the Judeans how there was once a prophet who died thrice. You know, and that's a very different mode of storytelling. And I'm trying to accomplish something different with that. I'm telling you about how this means something for us now in a different way.
I think a helpful way to think about this is if you want to use a visual metaphor in terms of distance and perspective. So let's say that you're at a little country house or like little ranch or just a little country house out somewhere in the country. Maybe one of those beautiful Lithuanian farmsteads that we visited, Father Andrew, which reminded me very much of certain places in East Texas that I grew up in. So let's say you're walking up the road to this little cottage and there's a farmstead and let's say there's a tree overhanging the path and there's some beehives off to one side. And if you're at a certain distance from that, say several hundred yards away, you can make out the most important details. So you have the cottage, you have the stork nest, you have the beehives, and you have the tree overhanging the path, right? Well, if you stay at that distance and you paint a picture, is that a true picture? Of course it is. Of course it is. Yeah. Now, if you walk closer to the house, you're going to notice, oh, there's a little stream right here that I couldn't see because of the distance that I had. And, oh, there's some garbage out that somebody needs to take out. Oh, I didn't see some of these messy details here. And, oh, one of the beehives is kind of falling apart. And, oh, there's some baby storks in the stork nest. And, oh, and so as you get closer, you see more and more details, and some of them might actually make the thing more beautiful, but some of them are also like ugly or messy, right? Yeah. And so if you get close to the house and you paint another picture and you incorporate all these other little details in, is that picture true? Also, yes. Now, which of those pictures is more true? Well, that's a nonsensical proposition, because the picture that was farther away, which is myth, has captured everything that is essential about it's captured everything that's essential about the frame, about the story of this location, about what it is at this particular moment in time. As you get closer, you get more details. Are those details, does that make the picture better or worse? Well, it just depends on what you want to do with it. Yeah. And that's the difference between the relationship between myth and history. I am not the sort of person who will read a myth about like the Aeneid, right? And will go, well, Aeneas probably never existed. Like who is that for? Like, I've never understood. Modern scholars do this thing all the time, and I don't know who that's for. Like, what do you mean he didn't exist? He has a poem written about him. You know,
Right.
like I have no poetry written about my deeds, you know, and so you know,
He exists
so what
more
do you,
than you do.
yeah, it's like, what do you mean he didn't exist? Like, he exists in the memory of his people. Now, does this mean that, you know, if you, you know, you were following him, you know, from the Bosphorus to Italy with a video camera, that you're going to see everything that's depicted in the Aeneid? Well, no, I'm not saying that. But the point is that myth is a true way of seeing the world, and it's often more useful in the sense that it gives you the broad strokes and shows you like what's really actually important about something. Whereas with history, especially as the history gets closer and closer and closer to us, you have all of these details about economics and other things that are not important. And you get all these little details, and those details are interesting. I mean, you have to write your dissertation about something. But ultimately, they're not actually the things that are most important about that story. And this is something that our mutual friend Matthew Namey and I have talked about a lot, including on a couple of podcasts, is like when you're telling the history of the 20th century, how would you tell the history of the 20th century? Well, you could tell it the way that we're telling it now, which is basically doing like socioeconomic storytelling, you know, where we're like, oh, there's these people, and then there was these economic factors, et cetera, et cetera. You could also tell the story of the 20th century through the eyes of the saints, that there were saints living in the 20th century, Saint Maria of Paris, Saint Paisios, Saint John of Shanghai, and San Francisco, who are literal gods walking the earth, right? Who are communing with God, who are communing with Christ, who are having conversations with the Mother of God and with the other saints, right? And their prayers and actions and deeds are actually the most important things that are happening in the world at that time. Now, that second way of telling the story is a more mythic way of telling the story.
Yep.
And we have our own myths, you know, like our own secular myths about the struggle between good and evil during the 20th century with, you know, fascism and communism and so on. But that's also a myth. That's also a myth. If you actually get down in the weeds and the details of things, it becomes very complicated, very
Yes,
messy.
very.
And what we really want to do is, you know, feel like we're the good guys, we are on the right side, right?
Yeah.
In any case, that's the difference between myth and history. It's about distance and it's about perspective. And sometimes myth tells you more and tells you at least more of what is really important to you if you're trying to sort yourself out and know who you are and where you belong in the world.
Yeah. So to wrap us up, a story occurred to me, which, you know, if we're coming down the mountain, right? So we've got these very high, amazing things. We're coming down the mountain. I want to tell a little anecdote that I just learned today about the kind of collision between myth and history. Okay. So I imagine you and probably many of our listeners know who Heinrich Schliemann is. Heinrich Schliemann. You know who he is? Mm-hmm. So yeah, everybody go look him up on the Wikipedias. This is a guy who said that he found Troy. Okay, so
we mentioned him in our Iliad episode.
Oh, did we? I didn't remember that. Oh yeah. Well, of course we did. I don't know. Maybe did we say this? So Schliemann went and he was this amazing guy who multilingual, very smart, but definitely kind of, you know, mythologized his own life to the world. And it's interesting. One of the ways that he did this. So he was very smart, polyglot, like super gifted guy. He marries a Russian woman and eventually apparently gets tired of her and then divorces her. Okay. Do you know about this, about his second marriage?
I don't think so.
So I learned this morning that he becomes so obsessed with finding Troy and with Helen of Troy that he contacts this Greek bishop that he knew. And he had asked this guy to tutor him in Greek. So he was teaching this Greek Orthodox bishop was teaching him Greek. And he eventually goes to the bishop and says, "You must find me a black-haired Homeric Greek woman for me to marry." Like he was looking for his own Helen. Okay? And so the photographs of several women or portraits or whatever were put in front of him. And he picks one. You haven't heard this story?
No, this is new.
And he picks one. It's the 17-year-old girl, and it's the bishop's niece.
Weird.
And her name is Sophia, and he marries her. And so and he, when he was telling the story later about his archaeological digs, right, where he supposedly found Troy and then the treasure of Helen, like the jewels of Helen of Troy, he made out like she was a big.
He basically did find Troy, though. But it's like it's one of those.
Which layer of Troy did he find?
Nesting cities, yeah. But
yes, exactly, yeah. So he finds these. So when he was telling the story, he made out that his wife, his new wife, his Helen, Sophia was her name. That she was like super involved in all the digging and everything, and that like when they found these jewels, she put them in her skirt and they carried them away. And the truth is that most of that is nonsense. Apparently, she was barely there. Not there when they found the jewels, whatever. But in any event, what he did do, and you can look this up on Wikipedia, look up Sophia Schliemann. She has an article on, and there's a photograph of her. And at some point, what Heinrich Schliemann does is he takes the jewels and he puts them on her.
Okay, I've seen that photograph.
And he dresses her up in these, and like, this is my Helen, he essentially says. And you think about that, like, just look at that photo, okay, everybody, look this up. Look at that photo and think about what that photo means in terms of this collision of myth and history.
Yeah.
And what it is he's trying to do. Like, he's trying to live in the myth in some way. And he dies. He was like 30 years older than her, so he dies long before she does. And you might think, okay, she was exploited, blah blah blah, and that might well be true. But I will say, but for the rest of her life, she went around lecturing about the stuff that her husband had done, and she had quite the career as on the lecture.
Yeah, she also did a lot of charitable stuff for Greek soldiers, and
so
it seems like she had a pretty good life. We should.
So it's an interesting story, and it's interesting about one kind of weird guy's weird way of trying to live into these ancient myths, this collision of myth and history.
But I mean, isn't this what we all want to do?
Right. And this is what pilgrimage, I think this is what pilgrimage is about too, right?
Yeah.
One of the things it's about. It's not the only thing.
You can do it in a weird kind of LARPy way, but you can also do it in a way that's authentic. I mean, this is what brings many people to the Orthodox Church, is the sense of it's a way for them to connect their story to this thing that's old and ancient and weird and has like all kinds of crazy characters. If you just scratch beneath the surface, all kinds of weird people. But it's got this body, right? It's got this story that goes all the way back.
Legend. I mean, what is it that Tolkien says, right? Legend and history have fused.
Yeah. I mean, that's it. I mean, again, like today I celebrated the Eucharist, with the priest over the bones of a martyr.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, folks,
thanks for tuning in today, or take a few minutes to stand with us by the Baltic Sea. If you were edified by this conversation, yes, please like, subscribe, share, review, click all the things. This show's home is right here on YouTube, but if we're also on Spotify, we're on Apple Podcasts, the Ancient Faith Radio app, and other places too.
Yeah. If you're watching on YouTube, do all the things, click the little bell, subscribe, etc. So you'll be notified every time we put out a new episode, which is twice a month. For our next episode, we're planning on talking about...
I don't think we've decided yet, have we? Do you have something?
I don't think we've decided. I mean, I do have something.
We'll figure it out. I'm sorry, we can't
we'll figure it out.
Yet.
I have ideas, but also like next month is going to be a pretty busy month for me. So we'll talk about it. Yeah,
we'll see.
Yeah,
farewell. Or as we say in Lithuanian, viso gero. May you always trace the silhouette of virtue in everything that you read.
This has been a listener and viewer supported presentation of Ancient Faith Radio.